Hello, everybody. This is episode 83 of the Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000 podcast. My name is Dan, and it's that bit at the beginning where I introduce my good buddy Philip. How's it going, Phil?
Hello, everybody. It is I in a slightly rainy shed.
Is it the shed itself that is raining, or is it a rain around the shed?
It is a little trickle down on the shed, which, you know, people might be able to hear, maybe not. Maybe our audio quality is so good now, it won't be picked up.
Well, we do take advantage of the mighty echo cancelling feature within this software that we record on now. So it's entirely plausible that they couldn't hear it. But if they do, obviously we apologise for Phil's terrible background audio. For shame on you, Phil. For shame.
Oh, no. Well, you know, it might add if we do like a little ASMR, AMSR, is that right? Yeah, segment. Like, yeah, little audio sounds, whispers, crinkling of the old papers.
You have definitely hinted towards your appetite for this kind of content before. Have you been consuming a bunch of this? Have you been watching a lot of Twitch streams?
No, I think it's all
various
nonsense.
People as they walk around a microphone, tapping it with their gentle fingers.
Well, I remember watching a couple of videos like ages ago when it first came out, just out of curiosity.
Oh yeah, you got to experiment with these things.
And then I was still going, "What is this? I don't get it." A bit like our normal show. What is it? I don't get it.
What is exactly? I was going to say, Phil, you know what? Whenever we start doing these, because believe it or not, everybody who's listening out there, these are not scripted in any way, shape, or form. I actually was worried for a moment that we wouldn't have come up with anything entertaining to fill that opening 2-minute section. But yet we always come through. Whether it actually is entertaining is obviously within the eye of the beholder. But we managed to speak, and that's something, isn't it?
Exactly. We try our best.
Exactly. So much so that today we are going to be talking about what, Phil?
Well, it's a little bit of Codex creep, a little bit of power creep in general. What's happening with Codexes, what's happening with 9th edition, how that plays out on the grander scheme of the rules and the armies as they come out slowly, the little trickles of the Codexes every few months when Games Workshop decides to bless us with a mighty new Codex. And also how Drukhari are doing really well at the moment and what that means.
I mean, Drukhari doing well was kind of the caveat, or not the caveat, the catalyst. Sorry.
It is. Yeah.
The catalyst that started that process. But then, you know, we felt like it was a broader conversation. So we're going to get into that. But before we do that, we have, of course, a 5-star review.
Hang on a second. What is this? Some kind of review? A 5-star review? Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this Warhammer 5-star review.
This week's 5-star review comes from Apple Podcasts of where, Phil?
I'm going to guess the UK. No, Great Britain. Great Britain.
No, Phil. Neither the UK or Great Britain in this instance.
The Americas.
Well, I mean, it is part of the Americas, although it is not itself titled America.
The Canudias.
The Canudias, absolutely. A member of the Commonwealth, no less.
My favourite.
Beautiful country. And even more beautiful for the fact that they have left us, not collectively, but this one individual from Canada has left us a lovely 5-star review. And that is Sergeant McGill. McGill. Assuming that is either the currency from the video game franchise Final Fantasy, or he is some kind of fish sergeant. And, you know, the gill refers to his breathing apparatus. What do you imagine it might be, Phil?
I want him to be part of a fish army that's going to take over the world.
That's it.
All hail the lobster overlords.
I don't think lobsters have gills, do they, Phil? I think you've made a bit of a blunder there.
Well, obviously, the fish are the foot soldiers of the lobster overlords. Like, they're not going to do that themselves.
Surely having foot soldiers that are fish is counterproductive, though. I mean, due to their absence of feet.
I mean, it's a surprise. Like, you would expect them to have feet, and then when they swim up to you and slap you in the face with a fish tail, like, surprise attack.
Exactly. I mean, the entire layout of their anatomy based on that description is entirely baffling to me. Much like that old ad about the cats with thumbs. Remember that? Oh, that was a time. But before we go down that memory lane, let's talk about this 5-star review. And that reads, great show, 5 stars. As is, Phil, a prerequisite of a 5-star review. And if you also would like to leave us a 5-star review, not you, Phil, although we've established that you've done that in the past, you can do so in places where you do that sort of stuff. And like Sergeant McGill, you too could be, ridiculed in this beautifully charming manner. Wouldn't you say so, Phil?
We don't ridicule them. We love them.
Well, exactly. In a kind of disingenuous way, but, it still applies. Anyway.
Speak to yourself.
I mean, I regularly do. Hello, guys. Listened to every episode. I mean, Lord only knows how many hours of episodes that is at this point. I mean, that is a lot of episodes. Exactly. A title, King of Endurance. And I love this show. The banter and fun these guys are having doing the show is great, with lots of gaming insights from Dan. That's me. I have gaming insights. Yeah. And a good smattering of hobby ideas from Phil. Ooh, that's you, Phil.
Yay.
There you go. Myself and my sons look forward to each episode while we are painting or just stuck in the car. God, could you imagine that? Being some poor child subjected to hours of being trapped in a car listening to this.
I know. I guess we need to maybe clean up the show a bit, with some of our slightly risque references.
Potentially. But we can't. I don't know.
It's very PG. It's very PG anyway.
Yeah, we can't water it down to that great extent. That's part of what people like. Anyway, thanks for the entertainment and keep up the good work. Long live the Death Korps. I mean, there is a bit of an oxymoron in the sense of long live the Death Korps, but nonetheless, it does sort of apply. I do kind of like the idea. This is one of those rare instances where someone refers to themselves listening to this show with their children. And that is actually quite a heartwarming idea. The idea that a family, a father and son duo, share this podcast as some kind of like bonding exercise. That's really quite bizarrely heartwarming, wouldn't you say so, Phil?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Brings a tear to your eyes, does it not?
If I had a heart, it would.
If I wasn't so dead inside. No, I genuinely, that's really lovely to hear. And obviously, we're glad that you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much. And to elaborate on that is, of course, the master of the Krieg, good old Phil.
Thank you very much, Sergeant McGill, the fish soldier that you are. The fish daddy as well, because you've got a little fish, or little fishes maybe. Well, thank you for such a kind review. I'm actually really surprised you've listened to every single one, because that is a lot. Like, well done you. And also, I mean, you're either Father of the Year or the worst parent ever for making your kids listen to us. I don't know which it is, but that's for you to decide. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're Father of the Year to us. That's all we can say. And if you too would like to be Father of the Year, or just shout it out in any way, shape or form, as I said already, leave us a 5-star review and we will get around to shouting you out at some point. It is our endeavor to ensure that all of these 5-star reviews get read. So we will continue to make shows as long as there are 5-star reviews to read, even if through complete apathy in the future, we just turn up and go, this week's 5-star review, and then end it there.
That is the verbal contract we signed with you, the audience, last week, and we will maintain it.
Absolutely. That is our pledge to you, although it is not legally binding in any real sense of the word. Anyway, there we go. We're going to get on with the show now, unless Phil has some final thoughts that he wants to share before we get going.
I welcome the Lobster Overlord.
Well, transitional noise. Woo! All right, guys, in this part of the podcast, as advertised, we're going to be talking about Drukhari winning a bunch of events and or the overarching impact that the Codex creep is having on the game of 9th edition, because it is evident with the recent performance of Drukhari within the tournament scene anyway, that Codex creep is having a very real impact on 9th edition right now. But we also feel like there is a wider discussion about the state of 9th edition after 8 months or so of release. And we just wanted to have a general chat about the state of the game, the issues with this generally quite reduced Codex release schedule that has been happening as a result of COVID and other worldly events. So yeah, it's a bit of a broad topic. Hopefully it'll be entertaining for you to listen to us kind of communicate about that. But yeah, it's going to be hopefully an interesting one. But we're going to start off with Drukhari have won a lot of events and why we think that might be. So Phil, Drukhari have won a lot of events. Was that any surprise to you? Did you go, my goodness, I never expected that to have happened?
Well, I do think most new codexes, when they drop, tend to win the next round of events that seem to be happening. They always seem to be the new hotness. And I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that. So no, not massively surprised. Maybe just in the sheer number in terms of, because it was like 4 out of 5 tournaments. That's pretty consistent.
I think that's one of the interesting things, isn't it? And you do raise a really good point, which is that for those of us who have been in the business of, I say the business, I mean, certainly we're not in the business of, we're certainly just, victims of would probably be a more accurate description. But yeah, for those of us that have been with the hobby for a long time, we've seen this quite consistently. And it used to be much more pronounced than it has been, even in 9th edition, in earlier editions where it was very common for new codexes to drop in a much more infrequent fashion. These kinds of codex creep moments would occur with much greater frequency. I think one of the most interesting ones I remember was the early 6th edition books, I want to say, or potentially it was a 5th edition book. No, it was the 6th edition book. That was it. So in early 6th edition, they released the Dark Angels first and foremost. They went, there you go, guys. That's the Dark Angels. And you went, oh, look, Dark Angels. How exciting. And essentially, the Dark Angels introduced a whole heap of new points costs for Space Marine models that were universal across, the other Space Marine chapters, like Librarians becoming 65 points or something like that in 6th edition, which was groundbreaking at the time because historically Librarians had been 100 points or so. So all of a sudden they'd come along with this Dark Angel book at early 6th edition and went, no, we've reevaluated the points. And then all of a sudden you're going, well, hang on a second here. What's going on there? But then, as was typical of the Dark Angels, they enjoyed this relative moment in the sun for being like the first guys out. But then when the Space Marine book finally dropped after them, it eclipsed all of that and then some. And then all of a sudden the Dark Angels were left out in the dark. No pun intended. But essentially they found themselves in a situation where they weren't as powerful as the Space Marines anymore. And it turned into a ridiculous situation that no one would run Ravenwing as Ravenwing anymore. They take Ravenwing bikes and say, oh, they're White Scars because the White Scars were better than the Ravenwing. And it was like, ugh! It was a whole thing. So again, that's one example of a frequent occurrence that is Codex creep, but it definitely feels like a more jarring situation in the case of Drukhari because, as Phil has pointed out, the amount of wins that they got, but also the prevalence of competitive play versus those older editions. Anyway, I think, the growth of competitive play has so hugely influenced the community and so hugely influenced the game design. It's quite obvious to understand why people feel like this is potentially a bigger problem than maybe it has been historically.
Yeah, I think there's also like a much better system for collating everything. So you've got 40k Stat Center, you've got Frontline Gaming running the ITC, you've got all these things gathering data so we can actually kind of be a bit more objective about seeing how these events are run and on a global level, who's winning what and with what, and then you can look at the lists and stuff all through BCP, which is the Best Coast Pairings app. Whereas even like 4 years ago, I don't think the app was even around then, was it? Like, it's a relatively newish thing.
It was around and it was utterly awful. I mean, it's not great now, to be fair, but you learn to live with its weird nuances, and they continue to update and improve it. And I'm, not having really attended any tournaments in the last year because of, reasons. I haven't had that much time with BCP over the last year, so I can't talk to what's changed with it recently. But yeah, I remember the first time we were made to use BCP, Phil, was when we went to Warhammer Fest. Do you remember that? Warhammer Fest?
I do, yeah.
2017, was it? They were like, right, you got to use BCP. And we were like, what? How how does this work? And they actually had representatives from BCP at the event to actually guide us through how this thing worked, which was certainly quite interesting. But yeah, no, I mean, BCP is certainly a good source of data, and I think that's the thing as well. There's much more kind of collective communication around list optimization and much more, as you say, data that drives these things. But I think the thing about the Drukhari and what makes the Drukhari so good at the moment is quite an interesting situation, because I do feel like Drukhari over-index or overperform within the confines of tournament-structured gameplay or competitive ITC-style gameplay than they might otherwise do in normal games. And when I say like normal games, I just mean like the sorts of games that you would play with your buddy on your dining room table with a relatively modest amount of terrain and, relatively, modest army lists. I think Drukhari represents to me a really interesting problem, which is a broader Codex creep conversation, which is the issue that GW has at the moment between creating a game system that is balanced at both the competitive end, but also more the casual end, because at this moment in time, it feels like Drukhari performs strongly because of the broader game that they are within, less so than the Codex in isolation. And I think what's interesting to me is I don't know how you fix Drukhari without drastically neutering them. And I also don't know how you fix Drukhari without changing fundamental aspects of how people approach competitive play or just normal gameplay, because so much about 9th edition is in the favor of how the Drukhari army functions. I mean, I don't know if you want to expand on that, Phil, or if you have any feelings on that topic.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, in terms of fixing Drukhari, I think the broad consensus is that it's going to be, there's a couple of abilities and stratagems that are a bit broken or a bit poorly worded that are open to abuse. So I think there's like a succubus that can do tons of attacks, that because it gets caught in a bit of an infinite loop of every time you attack and an attack doesn't wound or go through to getting saved, you can effectively re-roll it and keep doing it until they basically fail for save. So it's like guaranteed attacks, which is clearly wrong, but rules as written, people will allow it because, or at least a TO will side on a favour as rules as written versus rules as intended. And there's other things like the flying guys as of scourges that can fly over and then do a ton of mortal wounds on people, and the mortal wounds aren't really limited in any way. It's basically the number of models that fly over a unit. So you could have 20 of these scourges flying over one model, potentially dealing up to 20 mortal wounds to that one model, as opposed to there not being a cap on it. So there's kind of these little things here and there that are clearly a bit broken just because of the way it's been worded. And I guess this is the other thing, is like, so the Codex has come out, everyone's played at these events with these rules that are maybe slightly imbalanced, but the FAQ hasn't come out. So you're at this peak optimized time where if there are things that are broken, and even Games Workshop knows they're broken, they haven't been fixed yet because the FAQ hasn't come out, and the FAQ probably won't come out for another month or two, because I think the release rate of the FAQs are a lot slower than they used to be. It was always like a guaranteed 2 weeks after an event, after the Codex came out, and that now seems to have fallen by the wayside, for obvious reasons. So they've got this kind of perfect time in the sun where they're doing really well. And then, an FAQ might come out and change a lot of these things. I think the other general consensus is there's lots of maybe some things are a bit undercosted. So potentially just pointing them a bit more sensibly would make a bit more sense as well. And therefore, I don't think you need to fundamentally change the rules of Drukhari, but they do have some fundamental things that make them really good. Like you have transports that have an open topped rule, so the units inside can shoot out of them without having to get out. Now that's pretty unheard of in 8th edition and in 9th edition, with the exception of Drukhari. They're the only a
I
chimera.
think the Necrons have it as well with their barges, or maybe they have specific. I can't remember if the Necrons can shoot out.
I think they can, but I think it's I could be wrong, but I think it's like the Chimera in terms of it's got a weapon profile built into the transport that shoots sort of on behalf of the units inside if it's got a unit embarked on it, a bit like the Chimera. So it's a bit like that, but when it comes to a unit that could have any weapon option able to shoot out of it, it's like with the Chimera, it's like I've got 6 las guns, it can only be 6 las guns, that is it. It can't be I've got a squad of 5 guys or 10 guys, with all plasma, because I've got special weapon squads in there. It's like all of a sudden a Chimera would be broken if you could do that. And I mean, you used to be able to do that back in the olden editions where you could have 1 or 2 men out of the top hat shooting, or 1 heavy weapons team, fun stuff like that. And it's like, and they completely removed all of those things from the game. So that is one option that, lends them in their favor, where their transports are actually really useful.
Hugely useful. And I think legitimately, you touched upon a number of the reasons why Drukhari are problematic at this moment in time. And I think, again, to my point, it's about how all those things synergize with the broader rule set of 9th edition. And if you look at the Grand Tournament pack and you think about what the mission structure is of the current GT mission pack, right? Every single one of these missions within a tournament structure is played on a now smaller board, the 60-inch by 44-inch board, with objectives predominantly, if not exclusively, situated in the middle territory of the board. And in conjunction with that, they are hyper-mobile, relatively inexpensive to field, and they are able to avoid taking severe amount of damage because of the relevant efficiency of their transports. And this is a army archetype that has been in the game for years, but has never felt as strong as it does now for a handful of reasons. Reason one, no one else at this moment in time has transports that are as efficient as the Drukharis. And as you'll remember from our Drukhari Codex review, transports that have become more efficient than they've ever been because they got rid of some of their only negatives, which was historically that the Raider had a transport capacity of 10 and a Venom had a transport capacity of maybe 6 or 5. I think it was only 5, in which case you ended up in situations where you couldn't put characters in those Raiders alongside the optimized 10-man units. And that became really problematic for Drukhari players because they always had to have their characters running around or in their own personal vehicles. And that created, bad synergies that meant that the Drukhari players needed to make logical or, specific decisions about how they wanted to utilize characters in their army. Now it's really effortless for a Drukhari player to go, and my Archon is just going to go in that Raider. And then when I bomb across the table, that Archon will go alongside the incredibly powerful units that it will benefit. And I think that's the weird synergies and the weird things that occur now. Everything in Drukhari has been tightened up to be super optimized, but that is also then exacerbated by the broader rule set. And that's without me even talking about the ITC terrain stipulations, which take Drukhari to a whole other level. But I don't know, Phil. I mean, how are you feeling about their transports specifically?
They're really, really solid choices. Like, they're all armed with effectively souped up las cannons, like the Dark Lances, well, the Raiders,
which is an incredible weapon.
Yeah, because it's like -4 AP. Yeah, so it's punching straight through most vehicles,
and it's D3 plus 3 damage.
Yeah, it's tasty. And I think the thing that takes it to the next level, though, is the fact that they've all got the fly keyword. So these vehicles can be easily parked behind an obscuring ruin, and then the next turn just fly over it in what was it in a crow's manner, where it's like a straight line as the crow flies. That's it. In a straight
in
line.
a crow's manner.
In a crow's manner, as the crow flies.
Yes.
In a direct line. And obviously things like Space Marine repulsors used to be able to do that because they had the fly keyword. But now, if that vehicle is parked behind a ruin, it's kind of got to awkwardly go around that ruin and probably only get like halfway round because it takes ages to circumvent the buildings. Whereas anything with the fly keywords going straight over, it's like no problem. And that just gives them even more maneuverability. And they've already got a lot of decent movement anyway. I don't know if I don't think the Raiders are -1 to hit. It's the Venoms at -1, right?
Yeah, but they all have 5-up inbuns.
Yeah, and that is super. I mean, that's just so strong. Like
A 1
inbuns
in 3
on
chance
vehicles.
just to shrug anything.
Yeah, I've said it before. I've never won a game against Drakari. I hate them so much. Like they're just really tough vehicle. They're super fragile and light. They're toughness 7. There's 10 wounds in them, but they're really hard because the Venoms are -1 to hit. The Raiders all have inbun saves. I'm sure there's a way for them to have a minus to hit as well.
The Raiders are toughness 6, mate, not toughness 7.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was thinking. I was looking at it earlier, and its toughness 7 was on Chimeras, and their toughness 6. Yeah, that's it. Because I was noticing there's different, but the fact that they're even optimized in another way. So the fact that they're 10 wounds means they're under the 12 limit, I think, for the bring it down rule. So each one only gives up like 2 victory points as opposed to is it 1? Yeah, because they've changed all the amounts. So they don't give up much in the way of victory points as well. So I think the Dark Elder Drakari are super optimized for the secondaries as well in terms of what you're giving up to your opponent.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've heard some Drakari players complaining that their own secondaries aren't very good, but it doesn't matter because they're so well optimized to achieve the ones they've got. And the rule that we haven't even got around to addressing yet is the fact that they can advance and charge from turn 2, although most of them are going to be doing it turn 1 because they go as not Agents of X, sorry, as Black Heart. And it's one of those things, right? Like the ability to advance and charge is massive in 9th edition, period. The ability to advance and charge when your baseline movement is 7 or 8 is massive. The ability to advance and charge when your baseline movement is 7 or 8, and you can get outside of a vehicle to add a bonus 3 inches to your movement is obscene. Because all of a sudden, these guys are catapulting across the tabletop. And because of the relative size of these vehicles, because of the profiles of these vehicles, because of the mission structure, because of the terrain layouts, you can't touch them. Because they just hang out in raiders, out of line of sight, unkillable, uninteractable. You can't do anything against them. They just exist until they're ready to kill you. And when they do kill you, their greater majority of skills all lie within the combat phase, which, as we have established with the way that the competitive scene works, is the most important phase in all of 40k right now, at least when it comes to competitive play. So the way Drakari are winning is really straightforward. You can't shoot them because you can't see them. And then by the time you can see them, it doesn't matter because you'll never get them off you quickly enough because they effectively are so numerous because they cost nothing that you'll just never clear them quickly enough because they're just on you. And then by the time you maybe get rid of the first wave, the second lot just jump on top of you. I mean, it's just unwinnable. It's one of those things where the issue to me is twofold. 1, it's board size. 2, it's the terrain setups that further, intensify this line of sight blocking mentality. And then everything that we've just said before about Drakari. And I think that's the thing. It's like Drakari are crazy to me because they are just perfectly suited to play 9th edition 40k. And I don't know how. I don't know what you're going to do to fix that. Do you make them twice the points they are currently? Well, then you're just tearing the heart out of that army. And here is where I feel for people as well, though, right? Because here's the fact that I wanted to get to, because, who cares about the competitive stuff? I know we just talked about it for a little bit, but who cares about the competitive stuff? The truth of it is that for your average Drukhari player playing at home with his mates, he's got the army that is winning 75% of tournaments, but he ain't feeling it because he's playing normal 40k and he's getting shot a bunch and he's having close games, or he maybe isn't winning because he's just getting shot off the board at the start, or not shot off the board, but he's having a more, he's having a close game, as maybe the game should be balanced around, but it's that tournament setting that tilts it. It's almost like Games Workshop have made a codex thinking about 40k in the general sense, but because the greater majority of people who play 40k do not play competitive tournament 40k with those strict terrain rules, they need to balance them for those people. But then what do you do? How do you address that? How do you create a system where, because here's the thing, the reason why Drukhari are the best army in 40k is nothing to do with the Drukhari. It's to do with the Drukhari in relation. So it's obviously something to do with Drukhari, but it's something to do with a relationship between Drukhari and what we have agreed competitive 40k looks like. I mean, how do you fix that? Because you're essentially needing to write rules that accommodate one way of playing that is played by a small percentage of people, rather than rules that accommodate the greater majority. So I don't know. It's a real head scratcher.
I know you've thrown quite a lot my way.
I know. Sorry,
let's try and unpack it. Yeah. I think there's something to be said about, this happens with most codexes when they come out and they're really good. Will Drukhari be this good in 6 months' time when more codexes come out? It could be they will be, because their army play style is, as you say, particularly suited to either 40k in general or competitive 40k with the smaller boards, with lots more terrain, and the missions as well. And I think the missions probably play a big factor into what makes the meta for 40k, or at least competitive 40k. I think also it's one of those things where, because it's the new hotness, the good players will gravitate towards that army, and therefore an army that is good appears way better than it actually really is, because you've actually got just really good players playing that army. So I think the thing is, it's weird because obviously when Death Guard came out, everyone was like, oh my god, this is so good, it's a bit broken, but no one really saw that in the competitive scene. And I wonder if that was because when it came out there wasn't as much tournaments happening at the time, whereas now it's all sort of coming back on. So therefore this is the first time in 9th edition where we've really seen a 9th edition codex just come out. And I think also, partly it's that new codex thing. It's playing against the meta of the tournament scene. So everyone is really optimizing for killing Marines. All of a sudden you have a bunch of, toughness 3 1 wound models inside toughness 6 10 wound models. It's like all those Marine killing weapons aren't optimized for either of those two things. So it could be a bit of a perfect storm in that respect. And I think the other discussion that you need to have is how do you balance Drukhari now for the current state of play with armies that are not going to get a codex for like a year? How do you balance old 8th edition codexes with the new codex stuff? It's like the points costs for the Drukhari might be perfect if you only look at 9th edition codexes. But we're in this weird world where codexes are coming out much slower than they should do. We're like, 8 months into 9th edition. We should have had at least 8, 9, 10 codexes by now, and we've had half that. So
we've had I mean, in terms of pure codexes, we've had Codex Necrons, Codex Space Marines, Codex Death Guard, and Codex Drukhari.
And I think AdMech was due to come out last weekend or this weekend for pre-orders, and then it obviously being cancelled or postponed. So yeah, you've got 4 plus a bunch of supplements for Space Marines.
Space Marine supplements are in there as well. I'm pretty sure I've not forgotten anyone there, right? Yeah, it's just Necron, Space Marines, Drakari, and Death Guard. That's pretty much it at this stage, other than obviously the fact they've done Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Death Watch, Space Wolves. But they're just add-ons to Space Marines, right? So yeah, you're talking 4 codexes.
Yeah.
Are we forgetting one, Phil?
No.
Feels like we're forgetting one. We're definitely not, are we?
No, we're not. Tell us at home if we're wrong though.
Exactly. Please do. Please put it out.
So yeah, I think that's a weird state, because I'm pretty sure like you had as many codexes in 8th edition come out in that sort of first year, up till Christmas time, from whenever it was like July to December, you easily had 4 codexes come out. I think it feels like it's more now for us because we've had supplements, but if you just look at it on a sort of army-wide basis, it's like we've had barely any. And I think it's like, how are we balancing the game now? Do we need to buff the 8th edition codexes? Do we need to rein in the power of the 9th edition codexes? Like, do we need to up the points of all the 9th edition codexes to sort of help balance it? And then once all the codexes are out, revert the points back to a different level? I don't know.
Yeah, that or we go into a kind of competitive structure where we only use 9th edition books, which is certainly what is happening for a lot of people. Although I hear that Tyranids and other armies are getting some interesting builds and doing some interesting stuff at the moment. So it's not to say that non-9th edition armies don't have options, but it's just that thing where there is definitely this feeling of like power creep. And I think the thing is as well is that as we are moving towards a system that is built around these smaller board sizes, there are an increased emphasis on terrain placement. This is something that is becoming more interesting because you need armies in your unit that are you need armies in your unit. You need units in your army that are able to perform necessary functions within the game of 9th edition, such as performing actions, such as holding objectives. And that's where problems start to occur for the other codexes. It's not necessarily in their power level, although there is issues with that as well. But it's just having the flexibility and having the options and having rules that fit the mold of 9th edition. And yeah, I think Games Workshop does need to really address what the next 6 months looks like for 40k, right? Between now and the end of the year, so the next 8 months, what is the release schedule? I suppose it's more close to the 5 months, actually. Oh, not 5 months, sorry, 7 months now. But yeah, between now and the end of the year, what is the release schedule going to be for 40k? What quantity of codexes are they realistically going to be able to get out the door? And what are they going to do about those that are left behind? And then what is the solution to that? And if that is more FAQs, if that is more points adjustments, is that a new, mission set? Again, it's really varied. But this is a really interesting time in the history of the game because, again, it's never felt more popular than it does currently. But it's just in a weird situation, and it's a shame, really, because it felt like the end of 8th edition was actually quite a good system. I wish we were still playing 8th edition right now. I wish we'd just enjoyed, just had like a bit more time with it to enjoy it the way it was,
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the overall release schedule of 40k editions, I definitely think the sort of current 3-year one is a bit too soon, it seems. I always feel like you need at least another year to just sort of ferment the sort of the rules and the codexes, and just sort of, it doesn't necessarily need to be stagnant, because obviously you had Psychic Awakening, but I'd much rather something a bit more like Vigilus, in terms of like, having a release that can sprinkle rules for every army just to keep the meta ticking along and evolving a little bit. But there is a relative lack of like unchange for a bit of time that just feels like we've reached the edition. Let's just play it at its peak before we reset everything. And what you tend to find now is it's like as soon as the last codex drops, you get, well, currently it's like as soon as the last codex drops, you get maybe a year of psychic awakening, or maybe even less. You might get 6 months of stuff, and then it all resets. So it sort of feels like, yeah, the time between the last codex and the new edition coming out, you want to be at least a year, if not a bit longer.
Yeah, you want some time just to sort of enjoy it as an edition and actually kind of deal with it the way it was. Because one of the things I will say that is potentially an unpopular opinion, but not to suggest that I don't still enjoy playing 40k regardless of what edition I'm playing, but 9th edition currently does feel like the least 40k game of 40k I've played ever. Is so much more a game of elaborate chess than it is a war game these days. And I don't want to be a hater or kind of be aggressively against 9th edition. I have played it. I continue to play it. Me and Richie played a game the other day, and it was enjoyable. It was a fun time because playing games of 40k with my mates is fun. But I am much less compelled at this moment in time to engage with the competitive side of 40k, because at this moment in time I don't feel completely comfortable with the rule set, nor do I feel like I completely grasp it to the extent that I'm sort of completely comfortable with it. And I think that is because the game is so drastically different from how it's ever been historically. It's I mean, you have played probably the least amount of games of 40k out of well, no, I mean Tim's played way less, but out of the kind of group, you've played less than me, right? You've played maybe like 4 or 5 games. Oh no, you went to No Retreat, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, even then, that was 6 months ago or something. I mean, I haven't played since then, other than a couple of online games with you guys a couple of times.
Yeah,
but yeah, I haven't really played much. I haven't played at all this year, basically.
Yeah.
So
that's weird, isn't it? To have gone now almost 5 months without having played any 40k.
No, it is really weird.
Especially when you do this. I mean, it sort of feels.
I've got a hand in my qualification, and
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, so it's hard. Yeah, I'm sort of a bit reticent to like hate on 9th edition purely for that reason. Like, I want to give it a chance. I do want to play it. But you are right that the style of gameplay has changed a lot from, say, 6th and 7th edition, and even to an extent 8th edition. As you say, there's a bit more of a shift into that mid-table, a bit more of the focus on kind of close combat units. But at the same time, like, shooting is just like so much more deadlier than it has been in previous editions. And I think I sort of get it when someone said, "Oh, they're trying to make how the weapons." Like they're trying to make them act how they should feel. Like a bolter is a shell that explodes when it hits someone like a grenade. So they're making guns just way better. But I guess the downside is everything has a lot less survivability, which has quite a drastic impact on the game. Which is sort of why I think people are like, you need more terrain because you could just be shot off. Like turn 1, and that wasn't ever a problem in 6th and 7th edition. I mean, it was to an extent, but nowhere near the extent it was now. Like, we've looked back on recently, like photos of 2016, 2017 of those 6th, 7th edition games, and it's like there's literally like almost no terrain on the table. There's like this is at Warhammer World as well. It's like there's 1 or 2 ruins. You would be lucky if you got a couple of craters and trees, and that would be it. And you could have good games, and going first helped, but it wasn't the be all and end all that it is now. And I think that's just due to the sheer power level of the guns in the game. And like, you look at the previews for AdMech, like everything's now getting AP, lots more stuff going to 2 damage. Like, it's pretty crazy.
I suppose as a design decision, and that's what's interesting, isn't it? Because as a design decision, it seems to me that Games Workshop are further embracing the competitive ideology around how the game needs to be played, i.e. a bunch of units, circling around L shapes while holding objectives. And to be clear, Phil, again, I'm not hating on 9th edition. That's not what I'm intending to say. I'm just saying it's different, right? It's not that I hate it. It's that it's different. It is different, and it's different in a way that, like with any change, I'm just struggling to get my head round.
It's like the old Doctor Who syndrome. As soon as a new doctor comes along, you're like, "Oh, I hate that person," and then by the time they're leaving, you're like, "No, I loved it. They're the best one. No, come back."
That's it. But that's the thing with it, right? It's like I really struggled early doors with 8th edition. 8th edition was much more of a struggle for me than 9th edition is, because at least 9th edition is similar enough to 8th in terms of core mechanics. So certain things I understand from a gameplay perspective are still relevant. But it's just different. It's just, here's the thing. I just liked certain aspects of like even 8th edition, but also like the older editions where units had specific functions and there was a certain like rock, paper, scissor logic to your units and your armies. It was, these are my long range guys. And typically the long range guys are a bit anti-tank because it's, 48-inch range las cannons and things like that. So these guys will, sit in a ruin in the backfield and have a vantage point over the whole battlefield. And, they're not guaranteed to kill stuff, but they're quite likely to. Cool, that's good. And then that will give me some covering fire to take out major threats as I'm advancing with my transport vehicles, which felt more significant as well because they had armor values and things about them and tricks that you could do with them that were moving up into the mid-table. And then you had deep strike units, like shock assault units that would just appear and be like, I'm problematic, deal with me. All these different like aspects of the gameplay that would occur. Whereas now it just feels it feels like that thing of, the person who speaks first loses or whatever. It's that whole thing of like, it's so much more cautious now as a game. It's much less a simulation of combat. It's much more a game, which is fine. Well, it's fine. It's still fun.
I mean, one of the points you bring up is interesting about range, because obviously table sizes have gone down, and while it doesn't feel like much, it does have a big impact, because the thing is the table size has gone down, but the range of weapons and the amount units can move has pretty much stayed the same. So the scale of the game has sort of gotten bigger. It's like units can now traverse more of a percentage of the table than they ever could. Most guns can cover more of a percentage of the table than ever could. The sweet spot of las cannons being like 48 inches, it used to be you could hang at the back and outrange them with like a battle cannon at 78-inch range, but it's like you can't really do that anymore because of something that has a range of like 32 inches is covering 90% of the board now, just because of the board shrinking down slightly. And that does sort of have a weird impact on the game now that I think we're sort of starting to see. And again, things like moving, like the fact that someone can move 12 or 18 inches advance and charge is like that can just go anywhere. You can't really outrange anything anymore, or when you can, it's with much shorter range weapons.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? To put it in context, a bolt rifle in 40k 8th edition was 30-inch range, but you were playing on a 6x4 board, which essentially meant that the 30-inch range was less than half, right? It was, the whole, if you were shooting from one end to the other, you couldn't make it to the middle because that's 36 inches. Now, okay, you could move, so you could get to the middle of that, right? Whereas now with like the movement, the 36-inch range with the movement that you've got now takes you, beyond the middle. It takes you, probably 2/3 into the board or something. So it's like the equivalent of having bolt rifles become 40-inch range or 36, 37, 38-inch range in the old format. And that's the thing, right? It's like you shrink everything, but you keep ranges the same. So it's like if you were playing on a 6x4 board, but you gave units an extra 6 to 12 inches of range on their weapons, which is effectively what you've done with this, because you've essentially made it that you can't escape. Like, line of sight is one thing, but range is such a non-event. Like, it's so rare in a game in 9th edition that something isn't in range. The only things that aren't in range are like pistols with like 6 or 12-inch ranges. They're the only times where you even have to check.
I mean, rapid fire, because obviously that's half range, so that's another key one as well. But yeah,
but you're still in range with one shot at least, which is more than you might have been before.
Yeah,
here's the thing: in even in 8th edition, playing distance was a strategy because ranges mattered. Because the majority of stuff in 8th edition had a range, including movement, of about 30 inches. Most things had a 30-inch threat range, which meant that if they were playing from end to end, as I've said many times already, their threat range was less than half the board, you know. And it's like that meant something. Whereas like in 9th edition, you're basically wherever you need to be all the time. I mean, again, we're a 30-inch range.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of down to the missions as well, because before you used to be able to put down your own objective markers and you'd be like, cool, mine's going in the corner in my deployment zone, and then this other one's going 12 inches away from that, also in my deployment zone, and I'm going to kind of castle up here on my objectives, and I'm going to shoot you, and it's a bit of a fight over maybe the one objective in the middle. Whereas now it's like, there are no objectives in my deployment zone. I've got to go out into that mid-table. It's all be what I want to know from Games Workshop, and we'll see it when the codexes come out, is what do they do with Tau? What do they do with Guard, who are the two predominant, and Admech to a lesser extent, predominant shooting armies that don't really have decent close combat. It's like there's a couple of units that can do it, like obviously Bullgryns for Guard, Death Riders for Krieg, I guess. They're like the two units that can do combat for Guard. Tau have some things that can kind of do combat, but you don't really want to do it. So in a game that does, as you say, focus around that mid-table, how do they get around that problem? Like, are they going to fundamentally change the way those two armies are going to play, or what?
It depends, right? Because currently Tau are the only army in the game that still retain a ability to fire Overwatch all the time, right? So they wherever they get charged from, they can still do it, and they can still do their ability where multiple units can shoot at one unit charging in, the greater good or whatever it is. Like they've got abilities that give them a unique play style within the game. But the problem is their lack of mobility at the moment is what really hinders them. I think with Tau, you've got to kind of look at emphasizing their mobility again, getting back to like piranhas and devilfish, and building in strategies around synergies between them and their transports, much like they have done with Drakari. And also, I think in the case of Tau, they've got to emphasize line of sight, ignoring weapons, the smart missile systems, but maybe go crazy and extend that to things like their rail cannons, which no one uses at the moment, right? Like no one is taking a broadside with a rail cannon because they're just not as good as the smart missile systems or the whatever they are, high yield missile systems. So yeah, stuff like, I could shoot my rail cannon at strength 10, AP -5, flat 6 damage or whatever it is if I get a clean shot, but I can stand behind this wall and shoot one shot at strength 4. Or not strength 4, strength 6, AP -2, ignores cover because, it can shoot through the walls or whatever, and start introducing those kind of mechanics to something like the Tau. Guard is a huge question mark, because I don't know what you do with Guard to make them super effective in 9th at this moment in time, other than lots of tanks and other things. I think for them it becomes about abilities that you give their tank companies and synergies with their kind of horde game, not horde gameplay as such, but just their.
Well, I think you're right though. I think lots of bodies is probably the best way of running them at the moment, because the vehicles really suffer from that high damage output of just weapons getting more deadlier.
It's crazy.
But with infantry, it's like you do have ability to like fall back and still shoot through orders, and you've got move to just move around the board. So they can have a lot of board presence, but it's just via weight of numbers. They don't have any durability whatsoever. And it's like you don't beyond Bullgryns, you don't have any decent units. You don't have any like tough units to put into transports. Like the transport costs twice as much as the unit, so why not just run them up the board most of the time? It's like there's no key units worth putting in a transport, to an extent anyway. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what they do. But and again, the problem with the vehicles is, as we were saying, the meta is shifting to more deadly weapons. What I do like about it is they're finally finding a place for things like autocannons, kind of like light anti-tank or anti-tank light vehicle weapons. So they've kind of created this space of 2 wound infantry, like elite infantry. So finally you've got those mid-range weapons finally have a place. It's like, oh, I can kill Custodes with these, or I can kill Death Guard or Primaris with these weapons. Heavy bolters are now, you won't use them as a horde killer like you used to. Now they're much more like, oh cool, I can kill Marines with them though, because they do 2 damage. So they're now creating a space for a lot of weapons that weren't really used to potentially become useful as the codexes come out. But at the same time, you get this weird problem of you're making vehicles so weak because everything does multi-damage now. Everything does more AP. How are you solving this problem for vehicles?
Yeah, and I think in the case of Drakari, the vehicles aren't so much an issue because they serve their function, which is that they're there as transport vehicles, right? Like, I think, as has been established over time, the old staple of the Drakari army in 8th edition and throughout early 9th was the free Ravager. You had to have your free Ravagers with your disintegrators. Now no one bothers. They're just like, just a bunch of raiders, mate. Just some raiders, because it just works within the synergies. And I think that's the thing. It's like, again, going back to that Drakari point, Drakari works because of that synergy. And it's less so about what that raider does. It's more so about what it enables the broader army to achieve. And that's where the vehicles become really useful, because they're there to support your army. I mean, in the case of Space Marines, vehicles are hilarious in the Space Marine Codex because they're all terrible. Like, there isn't a single vehicle bar the Impulsor that you would think about taking in a Space Marine army.
And you're not talking about dreadnoughts here. You're just talking about
sorry, I apologize. Yeah. Vehicles, not dreadnoughts. Vehicles. You can find an excuse to put a flipping dreadnought in every day of the week, but vehicles themselves, nah. I mean, I would be staggered if I turned up to a game in a tournament setting and I looked across the table and someone had either a Storm Speeder or a Gladiator. I mean, if you turn up to a competitive game of 40k with a Gladiator, I will tip my cap to you. I will be like, mate, thank you very much for this easy win, because that what is that thing going to do? And again, I'll use the Storm Speeder as an example, right? Why would you take, right? It's broadly established that the best version of the Storm Speeder is the Hammer Strike, or whatever it's called. It's the multi-melter variant, right? Like, you and I talked about this, Phil, right? We all pretty much agreed that the one with the melter gun is the best one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's got missiles on it and a melter gun. You go, oh, that's got to be good. It's 170 points, right? 170 points. And the piece de la resistance on it, I tried to sort of make that fancy and I kind of stumbled on myself. The thing that's good about that is the melter. It's really the star of the show. And that's free shots, free melter shots. The thing is 170 points. It's toughness 6 with 10 wounds. All right. It doesn't have the core keyword, so you can't use any buffs on it or anything. And yeah, it doesn't really have any massive army synergies either. Why would you take that when free attack pikes are 165 points? Okay, fine. The attack pikes is 1 less toughness, but it's 2 more wounds and it's 3 more multi-melter shots.
Yeah, true. But I also think things like Eradicators make most anti-tank choices a bit defunct, purely because they're too good with their double shooting. And I think that's also a problem of the game, where in the past, in older editions, it's like, cool, I've got these. Imagine if you had Eradicators back then. So I've got these things, cool, but it's going to take them ages. They've got to foot slog it up the board to get into range of anything, or at least to get into the half range to do the extra damage. Whereas now it's like, cool, I'll just use a stratagem to put them in strategic reserve. That solves that problem. I don't even need to bother with transports. Don't need to pay for transports because I can just outflank them. And that one stratagem, while kind of cool, and it does give you interesting gameplay, kind of invalidates the whole point of transports. That's why most people, bar Drukhari, probably don't really take them, because if you do want to lob people up the board, you'll just put them into strategic reserve, or you'll have abilities that deep strike them anyway.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing. It's like there is a vehicle problem in 9th edition at the moment, without, with the exception of, I think honestly, the Drukhari vehicles are one thing. The monolith is another, because the monolith, God, if you ever come up against one of those things, that thing's legitimately scary. Hits like a truck, hard to get rid of. Like, monoliths are no joke. But yeah, outside of that, every other sort of vehicle variant amongst it is just really underwhelming at this point. And I think there are problems there that need to be addressed. But going back to your earlier point, though, Phil, you made a really interesting point about FAQs, and you said about the fact that historically, and again, when I say historically, I mean 8th edition, we were in a situation where Games Workshop would go, hey, Codex has dropped, have an FAQ. Why do you suspect they're not doing FAQs at this moment in time for codexes? Do you feel like it's because they think that, they don't want to penalize armies while they're enjoying their moment in the sun, because ultimately it damages sales potentially? Or do you feel like they're looking at the whole suite of 9th edition books going, this all come out in the wash in the end? I mean, what's your vibe on the FAQ situation?
Well, they are doing FAQs, but they're very minor, right? So they have done, I think the last one was, I'm going to say Space Wolves, right? I think it's mostly just COVID, right? I think that they're just not able to evaluate the stats. And I think maybe to an extent because tournaments haven't really kicked in as much, like that is probably the biggest feedback for the FAQs, like in terms of objective data where they can see what's performing really well. Obviously, people can email the FAQ email and complain all they want, but that quite often is very subjective and based on opinions, and obviously some of the opinions may be correct, but being able to go, like this weekend, Drukhari have a 75% win rate, that's really broken good. But obviously that's just one weekend. I think that will smooth out as time goes on when people start adjusting. It's just a meta shift for a large part for why Drukhari do well. But, you might see them regardless doing well for a long time. And I think overall, though, I do think Games Workshop's maybe just going, hold on to your pants. These will all make sense once all the codexes are out. But we've just got this weird, painful transition because it's much longer than it should be for these codexes to come out. And again, as I was saying earlier, like, should they be trying to adjust it to go, well, let's adjust the points of everything, because we know a lot of these codexes aren't going to come out when we wanted them to. It's not in a very timely manner, so we're going to optimize things. It's weird, like Psychic Awakening was meant to, it felt like Psychic Awakening was balancing old codexes for the newer codexes that came out with 8th edition. If they had sort of thought ahead, they could have gone, we're going to balance Psychic Awakening based on codexes for 9th edition. So codexes that aren't going to get 9th edition for a long time are going to get a really good buff in Psychic Awakening to keep them going for that little bit longer.
What's interesting about that is the idea that potentially Games Workshop have a idea of what all these 9th edition codexes are going to look like. I'm sure they've got most of them in a draft form, but depending on how they roll these things out at the minute, who knows where they're up to and what's coming around the corner. And again, judging by their current release strategy, obviously a large part of the rules writing team are sat somewhere right now working out what they're going to do with 10th edition, right? So, You know,
Well,
it's
yeah,
it's one of
because they work years ahead.
Yeah.
For some stuff anyway. And I'm sure they do refine things up to the last minute as well. But Codex is being planned out. Printing and stuff. They're at least 6 months to a year in advance, I would have thought. Let alone what's going beyond that, ticking away in the background. So, while they probably haven't worked on 10th edition, they're probably thinking about what they're going to do for 10th edition if they haven't started it already.
100%. No, I mean, I would assume they're working on it. They have to be. I mean, it's only logical, even if it's just relative paper parts at this moment, noting that obviously all these things are paper parts when it comes to books. But yeah, it's it must
I mean, if
be
you
the
think about it,
beginnings of
10th edition is coming out in 2 years' time, so you'd need at least a year to plan it. Probably an 6-month window in terms of printing, shipping, if not more. So it's it probably is being written as we speak, or play tested, maybe even. Who knows?
Who knows?
But then in terms of 10th edition, I sort of wish, especially because of COVID, they would just park it for another year, so we actually get more time to enjoy 9th edition. Because it's like it's been a year and I've played a handful of games.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, mate. I hear what you're saying. I think that's one of the core interesting aspects of it, though, isn't it? Is that Games Workshop is a business first and foremost, and they got to keep this stuff churning out, right? They got to keep new products coming through to keep us engaged and keep us consuming, essentially. So, in that respect, I do understand that ferocious release schedule that they have to maintain. I mean, maybe that's one of the upsides that I really struggle to suggest that there are upsides to COVID. It feels really blasé to suggest that 40K's release schedule should benefit from something so absolutely horrific. But my point is that this delay in releases might make them have to evaluate what the release plan is for that 10th edition, and maybe it has bought 9th edition another year. Maybe they are in a situation now where they're looking at pushing things back so as this is going to be with us for longer. And as I've kind of illustrated or indicated throughout this part of the pod, maybe I wouldn't be that thrilled about that. But again, here's the thing: 8th edition changed so much in 3 years. It was unrecognizable from its initial form.
It basically had quarterly updates, didn't it? And every quarter there were FAQs and updates for armies. So do you remember the old Iron Hands list that was like dominating the meta? Like they would kind of nerf stuff to the ground, but they would also fundamentally change the rules. They would go, this is working, this isn't working. Because you sort of alluded to it in a previous podcast, like 8th edition was really a bit of a beta test of here's some basic rules. We're going to refine it as we go with you guys giving us feedback. It feels like 9th edition, they've gone, we've got this, right? We've taken all your feedback. Here's a new edition. And they're like, and it's set in stone. It would be interesting to see if later in the year they go, actually, we're going to tweak some of these core rules and we're going to update them, amend them, not just clarify the wording, but go, the way some of this stuff plays isn't how we wanted it to play. We're going to fundamentally change it in the way they did with things like aircraft, boots on the ground. Like there was tons of rules in 8th edition that changed from the start of 8th edition to the end of 8th edition. It'd be interesting to see if they're going to do that with 9th edition, or they're going to go, nah, this is it.
I get the feeling that it's more, this is it, much in the way that Age of Sigmar 2 is versus the original Age of Sigmar. Like Age of Sigmar had the same sort of deal where they were constantly going, oh, here's a book called The General's Handbook. We never came up with this before, but here it is, and this will solve some of your problems, and this is another thing. And, they did a lot with Age of Sigmar in its first year. So, yeah, in the same respect, I think that's where 40K 8th edition was. It was just lots and lots and lots and lots of updates.
I mean, I really like that, though. I really like the idea of a living rule set. And that I'm pretty sure that's how they pitched 8th edition. It was like, there's never going to be a new edition again. This is it. And it's like, that's clearly not happened. But I like the idea of every year a new rule book comes out. Here's the updated rules. Here's a little amendment to show you what's changed. And we're going to incrementally change this game year on year forever. The downside of that is there are sometimes where you might go, we need to burn it down, start again, and fundamentally change how things work, which you can't quite do with that incremental change. So, maybe that's why they never wanted to do that. But I also think when they do a big edition change, that's like a real money winner for them. So I think they know that the years when an edition ships, it's like a real selling point, as opposed to here's this year's update. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
Yeah, it doesn't have quite the same level of razzmatazz to it. But I suppose in the topic of change, Phil, I mean, what would you change or what would you do to update the current crop of 8th edition books to make them 9th edition viable? How would you do that?
Well, after giving it some thoughts,
some careful consideration in that split second,
the little gears are whirring in my old noggin. There's not a lot you can do, really.
That's just it. Well, done. Nothing.
Basically, Games Workshop have been like, nah, we're good. Yeah,
I mean, I can think of a few things, but please elaborate.
The only really answer that I think they're gonna do is make 8th edition codexes a bit cheaper in terms of not codexes, the units within it. Like all they can do and all they do between let's think about it in terms of FAQ updates. All they ever do is adjust points. That they change rules here and there, but they don't give you new data sheets. They don't give you brand new rules. They don't give you new stratagems. They don't give you new relics. If they did a chapter approved 2021, maybe they'd do a rollout like they did in a previous chapter approved, where when stratagems were a thing and relics were a thing, they gave each army a bit of a boost via chapter approved. So they could do that, but I think the main thing they could do, and the easy thing to do, is just go, here's some cheaper units. And, you could argue that they've already done that with the latest update, but, we haven't really played enough to see that play out. Because as you did say, some older armies like Tyranids and even Imperial Knights are managing to win events.
Well, I mean, a big reason why some of those armies are winning events is because of the Forge World Compendium. That is one of the interesting things that's unlocked actually a lot of potential. Though obviously some other builds with Tyranids and things are working out because obviously Tyranids perform very well in combat. And it goes back.
Notice how Guard aren't in that list, even though they've got lots of units in that Forge World Compendium.
Yeah, they've got lots of vehicles in that Forge World Compendium, which is where the problem is. Again, there is a serious vehicle problem in the meta, but
can I say the Forge World Space Marine command tank? I cast my eye over that recently, and I was like, it's not bad. It's got some pretty good rules.
It is still bad though in the competitive sense. You're not going to make that thing work in a competitive build.
I'm going to make it work. I've got a cool idea for a conversion.
Yeah. We
might talk about it in the end of the show.
We might. There's a beautiful tease. I think I just think that's the thing. Like Nids are doing well because they got access to that dude that can just phase shift through terrain and then murder you when he gets there.
The Dimicarian.
The Macarian, that's it. The one with the weird chest burster thing and all the, weird wibbly spiky fingers. That thing, and then also they've got some crazy flyer that was doing the rounds apparently over the weekend, which was some real like super heavy Lord of War flyer.
Oh, the Harridan.
Yeah, something like that. Apparently that's got some options to it.
Wow.
I think. It's again because apparently it exploits a certain combination of rules that makes it really beneficial. Because basically Tyranids have an ability where after they fight they can move again. So rather than doing a fallback move or rather than doing a consolidation move for an amount of CP, they can leave combat and perform a normal move. But obviously because it's a flyer, what it does is it just moves off the table. So it just goes, cool, I'm done now. Way, and then you can't. Stop it.
It's funny because that's the sort of stuff that will need an FAQ just to be like, no, you can't do that.
Well, you can at the moment, right? And again, that's one of the consistent things is that, again, I do find that that's one of the interesting things about 9th edition 40k is it's so much about the weird interactions. But again, it's about the thing is, right, the way you win in 9th edition 40k is you have units that can do huge amounts of damage without having to take much in return. And the reason why that has become so efficiently the combat phase is because you can kind of dictate how that plays out, and you can use other weird sort of things to sort of manipulate that. But yeah, when you have units like that just kind of float around and go, "Hey, I've shot you, now I'm off," and it's like, oh, okay, like that's the thing. It's like weird little exploits that really kind of bring those things to the fore. But yeah, no, I think for me, it's like certainly they need a generic index, much like they did for, I think it was chapter approved 2017, where they introduced stratagems and relics for everyone who hadn't had a codex yet. I think they need to add specific secondaries for each army in an index. I think that needs to go into like a chapter approved book.
That's a weird one though, because you could just say, and this is something that tournament organizers could do, is they just go, yeah, we exclude faction specific secondaries completely until every faction's got one.
True, but not everyone's going to do that. So to be able, because some people will be unhappy about that because be like, well, it's in my army book, I should be able to play it, and that's fair enough. I sort of side with those people. So I do feel like maybe putting that into an index type thing for armies is useful. I think points reductions are definitely required. And I think, I think it's mostly that. And I think they also need to, if they're going into a sequence where they're going to offer, like specific secondaries, I think they need to add another generic stratagem to the generic stratagem list, which is the Space Marines pay 2 CP and you can still do something while performing an action stratagem. I think that needs to go in as a standard stratagem for everybody, because actions are so difficult for certain armies to achieve when they don't have rules specifically written to get around them. Like Death Watch have a warlord trait with a 6-inch aura. I can perform an action and not fail. Certain units in certain armies have abilities where it states that they can perform actions and it won't, and still shoot. These things exist in the 9th edition books. There's a number of interactions with performing actions, but not having to suffer the full extent of the negatives around them. Like for example, for Craftworld, my beloved Craftworld, I would throw in a stratagem which is 2 CP. You can perform a psychic action, but you can still perform other psychic powers. Like something like that would be.
Honestly, I'm surprised that isn't a thing anyway.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing, right? There's things that you can do which will benefit those armies. There's also a broader conversation around CPs that I'm kind of intrigued about, because I feel like, and again, we've kind of touched on this in previous episodes when we were talking about stratagems, but I think that's another thing that could use some tweaking. But broadly, I think a lot of the issues will be resolved in the next GT pack. I've got really, really high hopes for GT 2021, or will it be 2022? I think that whatever the naming convention they've gone for is the next Grand Tournament pack with their new secondaries. I'm going to be really excited about, because I feel like GW will have done smart things with those secondaries to deal with things that are problematic. Things like Slay the Warlord. I'm pretty confident Games Workshop will have come up with a way to make that part of the game again, because it feels so mad that it's not at the moment.
Yeah, I know. I think that you're either in two camps. You either loved it or you hate it. And I think I was always on the fence if I really liked it being a thing that you just do anyway, and it could just be part of every single mission that it's baked in.
Yeah, I didn't love it, but I certainly didn't hate it. I respected the fact that killing the Warlord is a significant accomplishment and it should be rewarded. And that's the weirdest thing to me about 9th edition has been playing games where someone goes, which one's your warlord? And they kill him, and you're like, cool, that's worth nothing. And they're like, what? Yeah, nothing. Like, it's like, oh.
Yeah, the only benefit is it's like he's not doing his auras or his psychic powers or his close combat potential. Like, that's sort of it. But yeah, the fact that you don't, you know, that was like one of the key ways to winning a game was killing your opponent's warlord. I mean, I could argue that, you know, things like Line Breaker was a bit arbitrary because only some armies could really do it, and that would quite often win a game because it was low point scoring. It's like, fair enough. But I think Slay the Warlord should be in the game in a more substantial way than it currently is. And I'd like to see it, rather than it being something you have to pick, that is just baked into every mission.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that's the thing. I do feel like the upcoming, well, I assume it's upcoming. I mean, it came out, June, July last year. So I assume we're going to see a GT mission pack fairly soon. But I think that's the thing. I think that will address a number of our concerns. But I also feel like there is a broader job that needs to be done on specific armies. And I do think Games Workshop needs to acknowledge that the points changes that they implemented around certain things need to be readdressed, and, you know, certain armies. Again, I'll use Craftworlds as the example. The thing about Craftworlds that made them really good was the fact that they outpunched most armies in the game. Like, again, they were supposedly a glass hammer, but as anyone who's ever played against them knows, they're quite difficult to put away. But they didn't have many guns on their vehicles and on their models, but the guns they had hit like trucks in 8th edition. But in 9th edition, the curve of power is already increased so dramatically that Eldar are not as powerful from a firing perspective as they used to be. And now you end up in this weird situation. It's like, well, when you compare apples for apples or apples for oranges or whatever the term and the phrase is, the point is when I compare, say, the damage output of Drukhari and then put that up against Craftworlds, I look at it and go, well, Drukhari outpunch Craftworlds. And, you know, for the most part, the Craftworld player is paying greater sums of points to access less. And I think that's where things are becoming interesting. And I think the only way that we can potentially resolve that is with points. But then the problem is that we create another weird little problem, which is we end up in a situation where people will be disappointed when their armies get cut significantly in the future. So I suppose the problem is with GW at the moment is, what do they do? Because if they come along and they go, actually, you know, to make this fair, your guardsmen, Phil, are now going to drop to, you know, their old points where it was 40 points for the squad, and they're going to go and drop down all your points. But then when the day comes that the new guard book drops, and all of a sudden they're telling you that 1/3 of your army isn't able to be deployed anymore because the points have been readjusted accordingly, is that going to feel like a negative, or is that going to feel understandable?
Well, I think you could look at it as a negative, but I think also you're going to be so busy being wowed by the rules that you should hopefully not care. It's like, okay, yeah, Lehman Russ has maybe gone up in points, or Guardsman's gone up in points, but just look what it can do now, like, because it's got so many cool new things, because that should be how all the codexes are coming. So, and I'm sure with Drukhari and Death Guard, there were equal grumbles about, oh, this isn't as cheap as I'd like it to be, or, oh, this has gone up in points, but it's like, but it's all so much better. And I think that's the thing. It's like we're playing a game now where it's, you know, we were talking about power creep, right? And it's like, I don't think there's probably much power creep between the new 9th edition codexes. I think there will always be a tiny amount to an extent, just in terms of the way the rules writers write a codex. Quite often they come up with a new concept or a new rules mechanic that will get dropped into a codex that makes that very clever or very cool or potentially competitive. And then later codexes will get that as well, but the older codexes will lack it. So I think you get a bit of power creep in terms of that respect. But I think overall, I imagine there will be a lot of balance between them. And I think, you know, as we said, Drukhari are good and will potentially play the mission very well because their army's sort of very built to that. I don't think they're as overpowered as the stats show them to be I think they're just the first real meta shift from Marines, that being the top meta army, and that this is the swing in a different direction, where all of a sudden people won't just be taking anti-Marine stuff, they'll be going anti-Drukhari. And then we see them sort of balance out a bit more with those 9th edition codexes.
Here's the thing, though, right? Again, going back to my earlier point, though, what if Drukhari is super balanced under more normal gameplay circumstances? What if you play Drukhari against Space Marines on a 60 by 44 inch board, but it's got a more modest amount of terrain, and you don't have big line of sight blocking entities, and they take a few casualties turn one to shooting, but not a huge amount because they're all then within transports, and then they get the pounce on you, but they have to expose themselves in some potentially difficult positions because they've had to essentially, run around in no man's lands to get those charges off. Like, in those circumstances, I imagine Drukhari probably against a Space Marine army is 50-50. And maybe the guys at GW were patting themselves on the back going, we've done it, guys. This is the first time ever where, like, Drukhari versus, like, Space Marines, it's a really even match. Like, they win, like, 50-50. But then you put it in the the competitive space, and they tailor everything so specifically that you go, oh, actually, as it transpires, no, Drukhari are just ridiculous. And that is to a point that I don't know if we've addressed efficiently, which is, do we feel like this is a problem long term for the game for the majority of people who don't play competitively? Or do we feel like if you don't play competitively, you probably don't care, therefore what are you worried about? My point being is, what is the situation with this?
So imagine you play narrative games, and your Drukhari are now good, but they're not broken. You can go toe to toe with all the other 9th edition codexes, using all their tricks, but then they get nerfed a bit because they're performing very well in competitive 40k, and then all of a sudden your narrative game has got to suffer, because all of a sudden you're losing games because the points have been adjusted, or you've lost access to certain rules or whatever. I think to an extent the rules that clearly seem broken will get nerfed. So don't play it that way. But if you're a narrative player, you probably wouldn't be doing that anyway, because you look at it as a bit more of a holistic approach to your game. But yeah, potentially you could suffer. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, because you could always look for those optimizations, and instead of taking one unit, you're taking a different unit. I think also what will make a big difference to the overall approach of looking at the balance of the game is, like, the Maelstrom mission pack, whenever that comes out, like when finally non-narrative, non-crusade players get their own concise way of playing the game, because currently they don't really have that outside of things like the Book of Rust, which has got its own kind of campaign system, or the Flashpoint stuff, which is also the Caradon Warzone from White Dwarf. It's like, if you want, or the open war decks. So you do sort of have ways to play, but you don't have like a focal point that people can gather gather around the banner and go, like, this is my way of playing 40k. Because
it is weird to me that we are now all defaulting to match play as the default way to play, because it is very, very labor intensive to play the game that way constantly. And I understand why it's gone that way, but it is and it's not just match play, it's now match play with extra steps. It's all the extra stuff that is expected of competitive play. And,
I think match play is fine, because like match play is like just playing with points, right? That's not a problem. I think it's match play with the GT pack is what seems to be the default way of playing, and I think that's a real shame. Like, the tournament pack should be, this is specific for tournaments. It shouldn't be the casual game down your local games workshop around your mate's kitchen table or whatever it is. To me, it should be something like Maelstrom or Open War or Narrative Crusade. It should be something else as the default. Maybe for a lot of people it is, but I sort of feel like that kind of pickup game mentality is, well, we're doing the GT pack, right?
Well, no, you can talk about pickup games, obviously, but yeah, the GT pack. Oh, sorry, I finally understood what you said there. You would essentially preface the fact that when you're going to do a pickup game, you turn around to your opponent and say, so we're playing the GT pack, right?
Yeah.
I didn't follow you there.
Right.
I assumed you forgot what we were talking about. Right. Yes. No. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? When you turn up to games, you just default to the GT pack. And I don't know if that feels like the right place to default. I don't know what the solution is, but it never used to feel like, I suppose it's the thing, right? When I used to go play pickup games in stores or in clubs in 8th edition, we turn up and we play Eternal War. And Eternal War in 8th edition was pretty straightforward. It was rare that I would turn up to a pickup game or a club and go, so we're playing ITC. Yeah, we're going to play ITC. And, get out the piece of paper and start having to jog down all the ridiculous stuff that happens when you're having to log all the different secondaries and stuff, which now has become standard practice. And again, it's that thing where it's just a lot. It's like, oh man, can I not just have a thing that when, in a way, for pickup games, I used to like the old ones where you just used to play to see who killed the most stuff. More of your stuff's dead, I win. That kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
But that was sort of the way it was played years ago, wasn't it? It was just, I killed you. Well done. It was a different time. But yeah, I don't know. Codex Script's an interesting one. I think as the year marches on, I think it's going to become much more evident how that's going to play out. I'm excited to see what Mechanicus bring to the table. It looks like they're going to be very strong. Shock horror. And I'm intrigued to see what comes next. And I'm intrigued to see how this shapes the game going forwards, because we know we've got the orcs and their new beast snaggers around the corner. We know that Sisters of Battle are coming through. We just had another bulletin this week with the
banner lady,
the standard with the banner lady. Yeah, absolutely.
And also there's the preview that we're going to have a Warhammer Fest online for a whole week, a week of Warhammer.
Blimey. Maybe we'll talk about that in the outro in a moment.
Perfect.
There we go. In fact, we'll do that after this, unless we have any other closing thoughts on the topic. It feels like we need some closing thoughts on the topic. I will offer mine first, Phil, because I'm selfish and I like to sound my own voice.
So humble.
So humble. That's it. What was I going to say? Yeah, so I think for me, Codex Script is in an interesting place right now. It's evident that it is a problem, but I feel like it is exacerbated by the competitive scene and what essentially, that kind of tells us about the state of the game. I think we're looking at this through a really, really, really specific prism, and we're essentially laser focused in on this very specific way to play. But I'm not convinced that this is actually representational of what most people are experiencing when they play with their Drukhari or when they play with their 9th edition books for the most part. I will acknowledge that there is definitely some gaps between the 8th edition books and the 9th edition books, but that is only inevitable. And I'm hopeful that when we start to see a fuller release schedule or a fuller release of books, that will start to drift away, which would be lovely. But yeah, Codex Creep it's a problem as old as 40k. It's been around for as long as I can remember. It's just one of those things. But yeah, hopefully GW will address it with the upcoming GT pack and potentially some kind of chapter approved literature that will expand for those armies that don't already have their own codex. What do you reckon, Phil?
I don't think it's as bad. I think when you look at 9th edition codexes, I hope they're all going to be relatively balanced with each other. I think Drukhari is a bit of a blip in terms of how it plays in the tournament scene. Potentially a couple of rules do need toning down and will be addressed in the FAQ. I mean, if that comes out in 2 weeks' time or less, that'd be amazing. But who knows when that will actually happen. So hopefully Games Workshop kind of gets back into that routine of doing after 2 weeks, we have an FAQ. And because tournaments are coming back, then maybe that will start to kick in. I think the biggest, and I also think, this happens all the time. Like when the Elder Codex last came out, everyone decried it was awful and then decried it was the worst thing ever. And then, yes, you did have Elder Flyspan, but beyond that, it wasn't so bad. So I think that's always going to exist, and there's always an overreaction. And I think, this week, Drukhari's turned out to be the anti-meta winners of tournaments. So next week, people will be tailoring to deal with the Drakari problem. And it always takes a little while for people to go, how can we deal with a particular army, and everyone solves it, and then it's less of an issue. So I think that's one issue. I think the other one is the difference between 8th and 9th edition codexes, and the delay in 8th edition codexes getting revitalized to 9th edition codexes. And are they going to do anything about that, or are they not? And hopefully there will be some adjustment somehow, whether it's through, like I said, the mission packs or points costs, to make those armies a bit more competitive. I mean, the only other option is to jump on a bandwagon with a 9th edition codex and just play that until your favorite army gets its 9th edition codex. I mean, that's what I'm doing with my Guard and my Marines, for example.
Such a try-harder, Phil.
Well, it's more just wanting something a bit different. I mean, honestly, by the time I finish painting up 2,000 points, I'm sure a Guard Codex will appear, and I may well just go, forget about them shiny Marine boys. I'm all about the Guard. But who knows?
Who knows, indeed. But what we do know, Phil, is that's the end of that, and we're going to move on now with a transitional noise. Woo! Phil.
What?
Warhammer Fest Online's happening not next week, but in sometime soon. It's like a week long. What's going on there?
Woo!
Ooh, baby!
I mean, it should be quite exciting. They've teased there's going to be some big stuff. There's literally 2 whole days, and by days they mean evenings, of 40k, which we, as a podcast content producer, will dine off of for episodes to come, or at least one segment.
Oh, mate, no, it is. It's
podcast.
next week. It's next week this starts.
Exciting.
Mate, I didn't realize it was that soon. So it's next week. They've got a whole week of updates.
I know. That's
although they're starting with Age of Sigmar, Phil.
They'll get it out of the way.
Yeah, that is true. What do you reckon? 3rd edition Age of Sigmar?
Yeah, it must be, because that's due this year. So yeah,
I bet the 3-year cycle.
Yeah, exactly. 3-year cycle. I imagine we'll see, they obviously preview the next few codexes, or sorry, battle tomes. They will no doubt tease us with some new armies, maybe. Hopefully they might sort of preview the contents of as you said, the new, was it 3rd edition box?
Yeah, I imagine it'll be some flavor of Stormcast Eternals versus some flavor of something.
I mean, it's been a while since they've done a big Stormcast Eternals release, so it could happen.
I know, all of like a year.
I would honestly like it if they just did something different, like 2 brand new armies.
That's like you saying that they're not going to do Space Marines in a Warhammer 40,000 box set, mate. It's not happening.
Maybe.
It's going to be Stormcast Eternals, and it's probably going to be them against a Destruction army, because they did Chaos in 1st edition, and they did Death in 2nd edition. So it's Destruction, right?
Yeah, I sort of vaguely remember hearing rumors about a new Destruction army, but I can't for the life of me remember what it was.
We don't care about
maybe it's Beast Snaggers with the guns chipped off.
Yeah, much like how the Zangors came across from Age of Sigmar into 40k, because they just put bolt pistols and chainswords on them. Yeah, They're just going to do the same with the Beast Snaggers. They're just going to take those off and just be like, there you go.
The joys of CAD design.
Exactly, delete. Right? It's a... delete. Done. Move on.
Find and replace all guns. Delete. Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing about the Beast Snaggers. Maybe it's going to be the Beast Snaggers versus I've forgotten what they're called, Stormcast Eternals, and maybe this will be the edition that bridges 40k into Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, it could be.
Could be. Exciting times. They've actually, according to their list here, they're going to have 2 Warhammer 40,000 updates. So they got Tuesday 4th, Warhammer 40,000, Friday 7th, Warhammer 40,000. Again, seriously, we have a lot. So either that states that seriously they had a lot that they'd already shown on Tuesday. How is there even more? But potentially it just means that actually they've got a lot of 40k stuff that they need to tell us about, which seems logical based on everything that's going on. What are you expecting to see from 40k, Phil? Come on. What do you want?
Speculation, ahoy. More beast snaggers because
definitely more beast snaggers.
Beast snaggers. There was the drawing on the wall, and it was
Mm.
things like there was like a giant kind of squig carrying a big gun. There was the war boss. I expect we'll see a lot more of that, so that there'll be a lot bigger units. Yeah, it'd be interesting. So obviously they previewed that AOS Slanesh Demon recently. I'm assuming that's going to come across to 40k as well, because all of those units have done. So it'll be interesting just to know if that's the case. Yeah,
I think Codex Chaos Demons is really required at this moment in time. I think that needs to be a priority.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so it's interesting. People have bought Be'lakor. They previewed with new 40k rules, although so interestingly in the kits you get the complete AOS rules, because you get the whole data sheet with all the rules.
Yeah.
The 40k ones, they give you this weird slimlined down, which is like a language free, because they just use icons.
Yes,
but because of that, you get none of the special rules. You just get the base stats of what the weapons do at their sort of basic profiles. You don't get any of the other extra rules. So it's like you can't currently play Be'lakor with the new model, with the intended new rules. You can only do it with the old kind of Chaos Demon rules for him, which is an interesting one. So either Chaos Demons needs to come out soon, or it will come out in an update like Book of Rust 2, for example. Because there's an awful lot of like summoning chaos demon-y stuff happening in that series. So it could be that they will do a bit of a Vigilus and be like, here's another campaign book with some data sheets baked into it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Chaos Demons, I think where they're really interesting is that Chaos Demons are the most dispersed in terms of their release across 8th edition, because Slanesh came towards the end of 8th edition. They had a White Dwarf supplement, and then I don't even think they ever actually put them in anything other than a White Dwarf supplement. I don't even think they made it into Psychic Awakening.
Oh no, they got a Psychic Awakening one. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It might be really the one with the Knights as well. But all demons did end up in Psychic Awakening. Okay.
And then the Nurgle aspects of it. Did they have the full suite of Nurgle stuff when they did Chaos Space Marines? I kind of feel like the Great Unclean one came out after Chaos Demons, the Codex.
I thought it was in there actually, but
it could be. Oh no, maybe it was a Death Guard thing. Again, this is my point though. It's like Chaos Demons to me feel like they are so in need of a Codex right now, because they're just all over the place. So, and especially with Be'lakor being added to the mix, I think that's going to be pretty essential for them. So I'd like to see Chaos Demons. If it's not Chaos Demons, I'm not going to necessarily worry about it too much, but it is definitely the thing that I think they should focus on. We were talking before, weren't we, Phil, about that prediction that was going around about Black Templars. That could be a thing. Maybe Black Templars. Plenty of people on the internet talking about that in different ways, shape, and form.
Well, so. I imagine what we'll get is a preview of a two army box deal that isn't like a new edition. It isn't Dark Imperium or Indomitus, but it'll just be, I don't know, what was it, Wake the Dead or whatever they're called, like just two random armies in a box. Well, because obviously you've got the Sisters and... Actually, maybe they won't, because there is one due. So you got Sisters and Drakari due.
That already came out.
Oh, has it come out?
It came out when the Drakari dropped, yeah.
Oh,
it's
sold
out.
Okay. Yeah, so I imagine there'll be another one of those due sometime soon. So they'll probably preview that. I mean, obviously, talk about the latest. We might get a bit of a release schedule for here's the next few codexes due, because they did that at the beginning of the year when they showed us what the first few codexes for 9th edition was. It'd be nice if they did that again for like the next quarter, even if it's just to say, sorry, it's only going to be one or two. I mean, maybe they're actually sort of, because they've kind of cancelled pre-orders, at least for 40k and AOS for a bit. Maybe they're doing that so they can just dump a load of stuff on us, after this Warhammer Fest.
It's an interesting one, though, right? Because I think one of the things that's crazy about whatever it is that they unveil at this particular juncture, or this particular part of the year, it's going to be interesting to see how that then plays out throughout the rest of the year, because there's still stuff that they showed off back when, ninth edition started that's still not available. Heavy intercessors being the specific example, noting that obviously they are available, but not, as a standalone box.
There was a bunch of like other officers as well. So there was is it like Palatine for Sisters? I presume she's out now. There was the Admech one. I'm pretty sure there was an Orc one as well that was teased, which may well be one of the Beast Snaggers now, because we know they're Beast Snaggers. But yeah, they showed off a load of different officers, didn't they? Like early 9th edition.
Did, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is interesting, as you say, like they previewed loads of stuff and they've not come out yet, like the battle tank for Sisters as well.
Well, I feel like Sisters has got a codex in the waiting in the wings, right? So, clearly a Sisters codex is coming soon. So yeah, I'd like, again, I think if I was going through my priorities for 9th edition 40k, I'd say demons are probably up there for me, close to like number 1. I'd say that Imperial Knights and subsequently Chaos Knights are in the mix as well, only because of the fact they've just now done the AdMech stuff. And I think if you're going to put AdMech out there, you really need to do Imperial Knights soon thereafter.
It makes sense, especially when they did the Freeblade kind of cohort in the Book of Rust. So I think that it makes sense that Knights will come out soon. What I suspect is there be a new Knight coming out, a new model for the Knights Army. They've pretty much done it every year because they're a winner. I don't think it'll be a Dominus. I don't think it, could be an Armiger, a new type of Armiger.
I think Armiger.
I mean, I'd almost like them to like go back on the old ones, and they're not going to update the kit, but I would like to see them do something with that kind of the standard Knight in some way. It'd be great to get like posable legs. They did a better job with the Dominus class only slightly, and I think they did an even better job with the Chaos Knights because they had a completely different style of legs. So it'd be interesting to see something along those lines for the kits, or just like, I don't know. Yeah, I think that it seems logical that they would do something new for Knights, even if it's like a weapons upgrade.
I think the Armigers is the part of the Knight collective that you need to address. Also, actually, if I'm honest with you, I think maybe there could be an argument that maybe there's an opportunity to release some infantry for Knights that isn't just Mechanicus.
Yeah, well, I told you I did my little sisters of the cog, or daughters of the cog models, who are like the shield bearers to my Knight Princeps, and I just like the idea of these little ladies running around at the foot of the Knight, sort of protecting it. So yeah, I would love them to do something like that. Obviously, you've got the Skitarii that do something similar for Titans. That is a Forge World upgrade kit. Like they've done they've done one model now, haven't they? Or did they do 2 for sort of Knights on foot? It'd be nice even if they just release them, or I mean, they don't need necessarily rules for them, but it would be cool if there were. It's not something like guys on feet would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm on board with that, and maybe do like a riggers crew, or the opportunity to ride on Knights. So like the idea of these dudes that are actually able to use the Knights as transports and then kind of come off them and start
bit like Sandworm Riders from Dune.
Yeah, exactly like that, man. Like the idea that they could just sort of like jump off and just be like,
or these guys going to have massive poles like the guys from Mad Max Fury's Road.
Oh, that would
swinging around.
That would be amazing. And then the Chaos Knight kit will have the guy with the guitar on the top of it
with the big speakers.
with the big speakers. Oh man, that has to happen.
I mean, I've always said it. I want Codex serfs. chapter serfs. I want like little peons of guys with scrolls and swords and shields carrying them. Just like little guys that add character to an army, so it appears as if it's in the artwork. Is what I would love. Obviously, they don't need rules. They could just be wound markers or whatever. But that would be cool.
Yeah. But no, something like that'd be cool. But I think the armigers is where you go with them at this moment in time, because I think at this moment in time, you've got 2 Dominus class things, and you don't really need to add a 3rd big boy to the mix yet, because that's fine. You've got 4 or 5 different flavors of Crusaders. So you've got, the Warden, the Paladin, the Errant, the Gallant, the Preceptor, and the Crusader. So 6 of them. And then you've only got a Helverin and a Warglaive. So, yeah, for me, I feel like there's opportunities to give us 2 more flavors of armigers. And the type of armiger I'd love to see is like a buff armiger, like as in an armiger that accompanies a knight and
medic.
Medic, or like, well, not medic, like a caddy. A caddy armiger.
You want the Atlas tank equivalent, like a guy with a little crane. He's like, I'm going to fix you up.
Yeah, I want a guy who sort of like carries, a sword around for an Imperial Knight, and then fetch me my saber. Yeah, you are. And then it's that kind of thing. So like maybe, I don't know, it's just something like that would be quite fun. Something that adds some like knightliness to the whole thing, because a squire was quite a common thing to see alongside a knight. So yeah, and that's what the armigers are intended to be, but they don't perform squirely duties necessarily. They're out there mixing it up. So yeah. I'm excited, man. They're saying there's a mystery as well, so obviously that's going to be Lionel Johnson, right?
No, I thought it was just going to be Horus Heresy, because that's the one big thing that's not on there. And there's been the rumor mill of an update to Horus Heresy and a plastic kit coming out with some sort of base models and vehicles, probably updated plastic contemptor, maybe, I guess, but who knows. So yeah, my guess is Horus Heresy for the Secret Sunday. What do you think it's going to be?
I don't know. I really don't know. Probably, I said it there, Lionel Johnson, but probably not. I think, I don't know. Who could say? It's so difficult nowadays. There's so many different threads to this. They could be re-releasing Space Crusade. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. My guess is Horus Heresy, because that doesn't really fit into any of the categories that they've covered, because obviously Forge World is a bit of its own entity. It's its own system, but it's not part of the specialist games, which is covered on its own day. So to me, that's why it could be its own thing. But also, it could be Old World as well, although I sort of feel like that's still years away, so probably isn't going to actually be that. It's going to be every year there's a big release, and I guess in theory it should be AOS free this year, but maybe there's going to be something else, like
maybe it could be one of their licensing deals coming back into 40k. So maybe because they've done loads of like deals with Bandai to make Warhammer 40,000 action figures, maybe they're going to put a Gundam army into 40k.
Isn't that Tau already?
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. Maybe they're gonna. What else they partnered with? They did Magic the Gathering recently, didn't they?
I mean, yeah, it could just be like, here's a new army for 40k, and I think that probably will happen this year, like something completely random and new. What else was I thinking that it could be?
It's all right, mate. It's all right. It could be any number of things. The funny thing is a lot of people listening to this podcast may already know. So, let's not waste any more time, because they're going, mate, I know already. Don't worry about it. Move on. So let's do some community questions, Phil.
Oh, yes. Yeah, let's do them.
Let's do them.
So, community questions, what are they? Well,
what are community questions?
Exactly. Well, if you head over to our Instagram or Facebook page, pretty much just those two. We do have a YouTube, but we do not do community questions there. There you can just leave ranty comments about our episode and how we got stuff wrong, and Dan will politely reply to you. But over on Lookout Sir 40k, the Instagram account, that's where every Monday, Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, we do a little post about what we're talking about that week. And you, kind fellows, ladies, and anything else in between, can leave us your thoughts and feelings on the topics and engage with us. Isn't that great? So head on over. Go on.
No, I was going to say, it sounds fantastic. I mean, the opportunity to interact with such pillars of the 40k community as yourself and myself. Oh, how could you pass up on such an opportunity?
Exactly. You can become those irregular regulars that we have, that we always read out. So become part of that cool crowd over on Instagram and sometimes Facebook.
Exactly. Join the greatest of people.
Exactly. So without further ado, I will get to the first community comments.
Is it further ado or further ado? I never really use that because I never am confident with it.
Well, just do what I do and get it wrong.
Get it wrong or get it right. Exactly. Who knows? Not me. That's
50-50. So we've got Ben Kerry 8245. He says total novice point of view. However, shouldn't all the core rule book as well as all the codexes be ready at launch of a new edition? I don't see why they need to rush out a new edition out only to have faction rules lag behind.
Oh, person whose name I've just forgotten.
Ben.
How naive you be. Sorry, what was the name?
Ben Kerry.
Well, Ben.
Numbers.
Indeed. Well, Ben, I think we could all agree that it would be beneficial, but then at the same time, how would they keep us engaged, right? I mean, the core of 40k is kind of, satisfying that retail requirement, that desire to own the bestest thing and to get excited about the new stuff. So although I do understand that it would be lovely if from a functional perspective, they just went, here's everything and you can just dip in and dip out as you want to. It's not really a very good way of keeping people engaged and keeping people interested. So yeah, as much as there are definite consumer benefits to that in terms of, people who are already engaged with the hobby, it's certainly much more difficult to get people to take notice if you're not doing regular releases that are creating intrigue and interest in keeping your chat going, because ultimately that's the thing that's fueling GW's growth, is the fact that we're all talking about it, the fact that people like me and Phil are willing to produce hours of content for no money whatsoever just to freely promote the existence of a hobby. Not that I'm suggesting this makes we're not single-handedly responsible for the growth of GW. I mean, if anything, their growth is but we will have complemented in some small way. There might have been someone who has engaged with the hobby through this podcast. I don't want to necessarily suggest that that's a massive percentage of people, but I know, at least from what I am told by listeners, that there are a lot of people who are getting back into 40k and they have enjoyed this content and have cited it as a reason for them wanting to to jump back in, or that we might have been like the catalyst. So yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like, and here's the thing, if they released it at once, what would we talk about? Hey, Phil, we'd have nothing to talk about. Just be like, oh yeah, that exists. Move along.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few issues there. One of them is they could potentially do something like an index for all the armies to sort of level the playing field a bit more, which would potentially solve that problem of what we were saying about how a lot of 8th edition codexes is like lagging behind the 9th edition ones. But then people would go like, oh, you've just made my codex redundant, or oh, what, I've got to buy an index, and then in a month's time when my Marine codex comes out, I've got to buy that. Like, people will get annoyed about that for sure, but there always will be in some facet of the hobby. I think the other thing is it's quite difficult for them to get 12 plus codexes all written in advance to all come out at one time and all be sort of play tested. Like, that is pretty much impossible. So if that was to happen, we would probably have a whole year beforehand of nothing coming out, and it's like no one wants that. So the drip feeding is just a byproduct of how the design team works and the release schedule. And as we said, it's not necessarily ideal, because quite often as soon as the last codex drops, it's like a new edition rolls around, and they do need to space that out a bit more. even though they've sort of got the buffer of like a Psychic Awakening campaign or a Gathering Storm type of event. So it'd be nice to see that increased a bit more. So once all the codexes are finally out, we can go like, let's play this edition as it was intended.
Yeah, totally agree, mate. I think, there are definite pros and cons, but it is probably unrealistic to assume that GW can make that work on a practical basis. But wouldn't it be nice? But no, that's just capitalism for you. Good old capitalism.
I know. On to the next question. We've got Dark Future 85, which I can only assume is a hint to the original GW game. I'm sure it was called Dark Future. It may have come out in 85. It was like an old sort of, yes. Yeah.
There we go.
Anyway, they say this one sounds good. What's this Warhammer Fest that they've pulled out? What are they on about? I can only assume that even though you know the Dark Future game of old, you have no concept of what Warhammer Fest is, because maybe you've just come back into the hobby.
Well, I mean, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on whether this is someone who is a frequent fan of the hobby and is disappointed that they have chosen to do a digital event versus the traditional gather in the Rico arena and wander around a bit, process that they've done the last few years prior to, 2020. But yeah, I mean, Warhammer Fest up till now, or up till 2020, was obviously an event that took place in Coventry at the Rico Arena. That had a lovely Grosvenor casino attached to it, which was a lovely time to go there. We played a few games at the old Grosvenor, didn't we, Phil? Ooh, what a time!
I think that was mostly you playing and me watching.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So often that is the case. But anyway, so, it was just the celebration of 40K, getting all the studio guys down, and it gave people like me and Phil the opportunity to go along and ask questions to the designers and chat to the, people involved in making the decisions and, creating the hobby that we so clearly enjoy. But yeah, this time around, they've obviously opted to take it digitally, much has been the case for many companies with their traditional events. They've, taken them online, and, it's a really pleasant surprise. I know they kind of suggested that this was coming off the back of them cancelling their pre-orders, but as we've already said, I'm very excited about the prospect of seeing more reveals, even if it is stuff that might not be coming for a while. It's cool to see it. So yeah, so it's a great showcase. Hopefully it'll be a good time.
Exactly. Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, because obviously they are someone of the retro nature when it comes to Games Workshop, Warhammer Fest is basically Games Day of old. It just got renamed for whatever reason.
Do you ever go to Games Day, Phil?
Oh, I did. There was a few times, or at least definitely once, I can remember that I went to the old Harrow store. You would get bundled in a van, and obviously I was probably like 13 or 14 at the time.
Bundled in a van?
Bundled in a van, off
Not
to...
a coach or something, a van.
Let's say it was a minivan.
Okay. Crikey. I got the idea of you being bound and gagged and just chucked
I
in.
mean, it could have been a coach. I honestly can't remember. Or I went a few different times, and you would go with them. Every store would have its own banner that it would display, and it would help you find your coach at the end. Otherwise, you're walking around like a lost person. There was these amazing old school, it was like live action videos that they had done. Of like Terminators and G-Sealer Colts and Orcs and stuff that would be on these big screens that you would just watch on loop. You could go play games, you could, spend loads of money, do all the stuff that you would do at a Warhammer Fest.
They had a lot more participation gaming. I thought that was always one of the most interesting things about Games Day that Warhammer Fest hasn't done a good job of replicating, which is the way that they got the stores involved, for one, but also the fact that they had all these really interesting kind of like gaming exhibitions, because they would come up with like, bespoke systems to play very specific styles of games within, the Warhammer universes. So, you'd have like an orc drag racing game, or you'd have, some large like blimp, airship fighting game within Warhammer or whatever. and it would all have these like weird rules that they'd customized for the experience. And obviously they shy away from that now because they don't want to do anything that's not official Games Workshop actual products, which is super interesting because that was one of the more fun aspects of Games Day for sure.
Yeah, they've done it a few times in terms of not necessarily there, but at the sort of Forge World weekenders where they would do. I remember I wasn't there, but I knew about it, and it was like they did Adeptus Titanicus, where it hadn't come out yet, but they were working on it, and they played Adeptus Titanicus using the 40k scale Titans and some kind of rule set loosely based on the new one for people to play. So they'd be moving around massive like. The Forge World Titans. So that was quite cool that they've done that. But yeah, they haven't really done anything since. The closest to it was just before 8th edition came out. They allowed you to have preview games of 8th edition that we all kind of queued up for to do. I remember that. But yeah, beyond that, they haven't really done much. They've done some maybe smaller stuff in terms of like some of the board games like Underworld, or like previewing the sort of third party licenses like the Age of Sigma card game, and obviously they were like doing tournaments and stuff at a time as well.
Yeah, but that's the thing, it's like turning up with licensed products or video games or whatever it happens to be, and having them there is one cool aspect of obviously what GW has become. But yeah, it's sort of indicative of what the hobby is now, which is it's less so much about that kind of imaginative gaming kind of old school tabletop ideology. It's much more, this is Warhammer 40,000 and this is how you play Warhammer 40,000. This is Age of Sigmar, play Age of Sigmar, Blood Bowl, whatever it may be. So yeah, it's not like they're not interested in putting something out at Warhammer Fest that is just there for the sake of being there. Also, I tell you what as well, one of the things about Games Day that was so utterly spectacular back then was all the dioramas that they would bring down, because that was before they had like a proper consistent exhibition space at Warhammer World, and seeing those kind of dioramas was so rare back then. I remember going to the one in 1999 at not the NEC, but it was the Birmingham indoor arena or whatever it was called.
Yeah, it was up at Birmingham.
Yeah. It was near like the river and all the rest of it. But I remember going into there, and like yourself, Phil, they had all the things on loop and all the rest of it. But seeing the old Horus Heresy, Gates of Terror diorama from back in 99, I was absolutely blown away by it. It was just such a gorgeous build. I'm surprised they still don't have that on display. It's so cool. Or at least it was. Maybe if I saw it again, I'd be a little bit like, ooh.
Yeah, it might not have aged well. I think that's the thing. The quality of those ones at Warhammer World now probably surpass it. But maybe they should redo it, potentially.
Yeah, once they start getting all those Primarchs out, right? It's the way to go.
That's true, yeah. I mean, you did remind me of my other prediction for Secret Sunday, and that is maybe it's to do with the Warhammer animations, like Hammer and Bolter and Hammer.
Oh.
Potentially it might be to do with that, but then maybe they just sprinkle that into whatever day those animations are for, predominantly 40k, it seems.
Yeah, see what happens, right? Next question, Phil.
Next question is from Archon John. What do you think he's going to talk about?
I mean, it's a mystery to me. I never know.
Exactly.
Archon John. He's an untrustworthy character.
Exactly, as his name implies. He says, I think the way of the world can't be helped right now, but it raises interesting quandaries for when and where to apply the nerf bat. For example, Drakari are now the new hotness. Congratulations, Archon John. You've won the prize of 40k. With worldwide condemnation of their abilities, okay, an exaggeration slightly, he says, but do you nerf in the short term, ultimately harming them in the long term once all the codexes are released? Or do you leave them as they are, run rampant in the slow release cycle of 9th edition codices?
I don't think you need to necessarily nerf Drakari. I think you need to bring other things up, and I think that will happen with the codexes. But I think, again, to go back to my consistent point throughout this, the main issue with Drakari is not the codex, it's the rule set. It's the small boards, it's the terrain, it's all of that. You put them on a normal game, And again, I appreciate people might be like, but what do you mean when you mean a normal game? I mean a normal game, like, you know, like not with massive line of sight blocking bits of terrain in the middle of the board. I mean like a normal 40k board that you would have seen in any other normal set of circumstances at like a Games Workshop store or Warhammer World of Old. Drukhari will not be as powerful as they are in the ICC setting, but unfortunately within the ITC setting they are super strong. But I don't think that again, I really don't want them to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. I want them to I don't want them to kill off Drukhari. I want Drukhari to remain strong, but I want them to address and again, maybe this is a catalyst for conversation, because I think people should acknowledge that one of the main reasons why Drukhari are the way they are is not because of the Codex, it's because of the stipulations. And yeah, I think we need to have a discussion about how we start to use terrain going forwards. But we've labored that point so many times. So there you go. I don't know. What do you reckon, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially like up their points, for example. If they really were seen to be too powerful, you could up their points temporarily, and that might fix it. And then once all the codexes come out, you can, you know, reset back to what they currently are, because obviously you don't want to do anything permanently damaging to them if they are correctly balanced with other 9th edition codexes. But as you said, the better way is probably to, you know, reduce points for 8th edition stuff to make them a bit more competitive. What I think is it'll be a bit of everything. So I imagine some stuff in Drukhari do need to be either FAQ'd, so there's some janky rules that are being played probably not in the spirit of the game. They need to be ironed out. Some things might be too overcosted and just need to, also undercosted and need to be upped in points. That's probably only a couple of units, not the whole army. And then, yeah, lastly, probably most 8th edition armies need to be a tiny bit cheaper just to compensate potentially. But then some are currently doing okay, so maybe it's not too much of an issue. Yeah, I'll go on to the next one anyway. So we got ethical ice cream truck. Oh, we forgot that. Ethical ice cream truck. He says, I think the answer lies with moving to a living rule set. GW could adjust rules and points via the app on a regular, using data from actual games played. Players paying a monthly fee for all the rules and log the results of games on the app. Also a feature they need to add. The whole thing would work like software patches, and changes would be reflected in your list in real time. If one unit or faction is too weak or strong, the points move up or down. The app has to be the future of the game's rules. As new players, I can't believe how old-fashioned and outdated the book method is. Loving the shows, thumbs up.
Hey, look at that. Loving the shows. And we love you. There we go. Going strong with that. Here's my feeling with this, and I might sound like a bit of an old fuddy-duddy when I get into this stuff, but I do think with the way that 40k is a hobby, and it is as much an expression of people's, you know, artistic and kind of personal aspirations around the armies they play and how they express their you know, their preferences through, you know, the armies they play, the way they play them, and all these different things that go into creating armies. And I think it's fair to people to have a system that moves that quickly in a, you know, game that requires effort such as building and painting models. I think you need to have periods of calm. I think you need to have at least, you know, a year or two to not massively change the way your armies play, because someone might put a lot of effort into building the perfect 2,000 point army that they've beautifully painted, and then they find out that it's actually now 2,000, 20 points. They need to make cuts. So they either need to go, oh, well, now I can't give that guy a power sword, but I've modeled him with a power sword and I painstakingly did it, and I'm really pride myself on WYSIWYG. So now I've got two options. I either need to buy a new box to build a new sergeant to do that there, or I need to awkwardly explain to people that that's not in the list because they've changed the points frequently. You know, it's those kind of elements that you know, I think we have to be conscious of as a player base. Yes, it's good to have frequent updates. If it would as straightforward as software where those changes are immediately impacted into the game, this isn't software. It's a hobby. And I think that's the where I would tread carefully with updating every month, for example.
Yeah, you make a good point, because I am that person that is spending 2 years painting a Marine army, and my Smash Captain that I built before even the second version of the Space Marine code, or maybe I built it afterwards or around that sort of time, because that's when we started the idea of doing a Marine army for every single one of us on the podcast. Yeah, and it's like I'm still slowly painting up that army, and it's going to take me, it'll be like by the end of the year I might have finally got it done, which is 2.5 years to get that built and painted, but also be really nicely painted. So by having that longer delay, you're actually encouraging people to spend a bit more time and effort in painting up their armies, whereas you could go the other way around with fast turnarounds of updates, and then it's a chase to the bottom of the barrel for tournament players to what's the minimum effort I can get into painting this army up to make it playable and as competitive as possible, chasing that meta. I do think there is a certain future in terms of having rules in the app and updates via the app and having a living rule set. Maybe monthly is a bit too crazy, but those old quarterly updates could be rolled out. What I would like is, rather than tons of FAQs, is to when there's that little magenta bit of text to update a rule, that it actually updates that rule in the app. And I'm sure it does. And then the FAQ should really be there just to notify you that when rules have changed, because it will be quite often potentially, if rules are changing a lot, you won't even notice they've changed. I saw someone recently talking about, you can just combat squad your Space Marines like in the middle of a game. And then I was reading something else just today where it was like, oh yeah, that stratagem doesn't exist anymore. And it's so it's quite easy. That's, because even between codexes, people still don't remember that or realize that certain rules have changed and certain stratagems aren't in the new codex versus in the old codex. So yeah, I do think I love the idea of an app, and I've said it before that the app is you should be able to log your games in there. So Games Workshop have all the stats at their hand. It's not just from tournament events. It is the everyman playing their game not down the pub, but having a casual game with their mates, having some drinks or whatever. It's like at the moment, those stats aren't being seen anywhere because we're only logging tournament events, which will create a bit of disparity in the meta. So Games Workshop being able to collect every single game via the app would be great. There is some sort of digital gatekeeping in that, in terms of like, oh, do I need an app to be able to play the game? Do I need an expensive phone that's a smartphone to be able to play the game now? Not everyone who's in this hobby will have one of those. Some of them might be young kids. So you don't necessarily want a barrier to entry in terms of playing the game. Yeah. But having them as optional extras that are optional, because you can still always do the book method, would be good.
Yeah, there is definitely a high likelihood that people who engage in a hobby like 40k might not want to own a smartphone for whatever reason. Again, I appreciate the percentages are going to be extraordinarily small, but I think, there are people out there who aren't interested in owning that kind of a device, and they may also be the sorts of people that are interested in playing, games of small toy soldiers. And, I don't think we should go exclusively down an app route necessarily, but at the same point, I do think it makes sense. But again, the core of it, again, going back to the capitalism conversation, Games Workshop make a lot of money selling books. So they're always going to find a way to get you to buy a book.
Yeah. For sure.
Any more, Phil?
Yeah, we loads more. Next one's
loads
from Cantor.
Well, we're gonna have to be relatively sparing. I'll give you 2 more.
Okay, fair enough. I'll do one on here and then another one on Facebook. So Cantor Blue says, great topic. I want to ask another historic question in terms of game additions. What is the worst example you have seen over the years of codex creep or OP codexes, and why is it Elder?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Right? Because I think here is the thing. Elder, specifically Craftworld Elder, have gone through an interesting journey throughout 40k. The 2nd edition Elder Codex was bonkers. It was filled with stuff that was bonkers. And that was broadly established as being a mad old rule set, and we moved on to 3rd. The 3rd edition Elder Codex, as a baseline, was strong, but not absurdly strong within the context of 3rd edition. However, when they added the supplement to it, the Craftworld supplement that allows you to start exploiting things like Eltok and Ulfway and all that stuff, then they very quickly crept into the top tier. The 4th edition Elder Codex, right? And this is, again, something I've consistently said. The 4th edition Elder Codex, in my opinion, is the best Elder Codex they've ever done. It beautifully personified what the Elder army should be, and it also made it so as the that everything was an option. Like, nothing in that Elder Codex was bad. That being said, it did have some stuff in it that was really good as well, like the Tempest launcher for the Dark Reaper Exarch, when it was introduced in 4th edition, used to shoot 3 small blast templates, and they literally used to just delete tactical squads, which was a big deal back then. But yeah, then Elder fell off in 5th because they didn't have a 5th edition book. But then their 6th edition book came out, and they went, hey, look, there's a Wraith Lord. Or not a Wraith Lord, sorry, a Wraith Knight. And then everything went bonkers from there. So yeah, Elder have enjoyed a lot of time at the top of the pyramid. But I think, again, depending on where you go back on them, they've definitely been a high skill army to play. And I feel like in older editions, Elder weren't necessarily as bad as they have been lately. I'd probably just give the example of easily the most broken Codex Creep Codex that I ever remember was Space Wolves in 5th edition. That was the most mental one that they've ever had, because they went, here's Space Wolves. They're better than Space Marines in every way, and they have the most bizarrely broken psychic powers. Oh, and loads of extra stuff. It was like literally they threw the kitchen sink at that book. And that was, again, to put in context, the 5th edition, it might have even been a 4th edition, but I think it was a 5th edition Space Wolves book, remained competitive all the way through 6th edition as well. That's how crazy it was.
Yeah, that was the one with the I shoot you and you die power. And you just get removed from the table.
Completely. They had these things called wolf banners that you could give to tactical squads. So you just put a banner on it, and they had the ability to re-roll hits and all the rest of it, which was really rare back then. But you just used to get it on Space Wolves as a 10-point upgrade. It was like, all right, cool. It was so utterly broken. And the lone wolf rules, oh my God, they introduced lone wolves in 5th edition Space Wolf Codex, and they were crazy. They had Eternal Warrior. They had everything going for them. You put them in Terminator armor. You just basically had these unkillable combat monsters that just ran at people. And if I remember correctly, I think the Lone Wolf, when it was first introduced, was free. I don't think they cost you any points.
Oh, wow.
I think the logic is they were free, but if you killed them, they gave victory points to your enemy. So if your enemy killed them, they were awarded victory points, but they didn't actually cost you anything to field. Or something crazy like that. There was some weird jank with lone wolves that made them mad for ages. There was a reason why everyone had a lone wolf once upon a time. I'm not even sure if lone wolves are even in the 9th edition Space Wolf Codex, you know?
I mean, I'd assume not, but who knows?
The app will know. Except now I've got to turn my phone back on, which could mean background calls. We'll just leave it out there as speculation. Lone wolves. Oh. What about you, Phil? You got any examples?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in more recent years, in terms of 8th edition, we had things like Iron Hands got crazy good. We had Elder Fly Spam, which was, as you know, was crazy good. In older editions, I'm trying to think, because I predominantly, did tournaments back in 6th and 7th edition. So things that I can recollect were Elder were always really good. As we said, Wraith Knights were crazy good. They were like the boogeyman whenever I went up against one. It was like, oh, God, right, one of those. Because they were renowned for just being so undercosted. And these were the days when they would be undercosted for a year or more because they wouldn't really do updates until another codex came out. And it was only towards the end of 7th edition where they were really getting the hang of doing adjustments and updates. But even then it was mostly FAQs. I don't think it was points adjustments. Trying to think the other one. in terms of armies. I think when it got to 7th edition, towards the end with the special detachment type stuff, that's when it got a bit crazy. So I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was the drop force for Space Marines, where you could drop down
Skyhammer detachment.
Yes, and you would all have like, was it grav cannons and just blow stuff up with it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you could you came down in a drop pod. You had reroll hits and wounds or something when you came down, or rather, you had reroll hits, and then you got reroll wounds because the grav amp gave you reroll wounds, and then the assault squad could come down and charge after they come down. But again, that was in addition. When you arrived from Deep Strike, you couldn't charge afterwards, but you could if you took them in the. Yeah, like the formations made it crazy.
The formations, that was it, yeah.
The Librarius Conclave was utterly ridiculous. The Riptide Wing, which was like 3 Riptides in a formation. It's like, wow, this is crazy. And even things like the Imperial Lance. Do you remember that? The Imperial Knight formation, which was just 3 Imperial Knights, but they were amazing.
I think like... Oh, go on.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think, look, all the format, basically everything that happened towards the end of 7th edition was mad, but it was scorched earth, right? Like Games Workshop just didn't care at that point. They were eyes on 8th edition. They didn't mind about.
I mean, I think it's one of those weird things to say. Like quite often, even with the more recent like meta busting stuff, it's like I haven't played against barely any of them. It's like because it's like I go to a handful of tournaments. There's only a handful of players running those busted lists. Like, in terms of Elder Fly Spam, you went to a GT and you were like one of 2 people playing it. It's like it exists. Yes, they're in the top tables. Yes, you won a GT with it. But it's not like everyone's running it. Not everyone's running these busted lists. It's like most people, even at a tournament, you'll play relatively average. Well, not average, but like, they're not these kind of net lists or the boogeyman of what is the top meta, because very few people are fortunate or in a position where they can either churn out a brand new army to run it, or they're people like yourself, Dan, where you predominantly have that army or have enough in that collection to run that army. Because you're an Elder player, like you didn't go out of your way. I mean, you did go out of your way and buy a bunch more flyers, but you already had a bunch as well, didn't you?
No, yeah. Well, no. If you remember, Phil, I was running flyers all the time in 7th edition because they were bad in 7th edition, and that's why I had all of them. Because I mean, you remember we went to that 7th edition event where we did the
Council of War.
Yeah. I had 3 flyers in that list, and that was in 7th edition where they were utterly terrible. In fact,
I'm sure I remember you buying one in 8th edition to paint up.
I think I might have. I think I bought a couple to do as Crimson Hunter Exarchs because I had a couple Crimson Hunters.
I
had loads of flyers because I was loving flyers in 7th edition because I loved the model, but also because they were bad, and I liked running the stuff that was bad with my Elder army back then because I didn't think they were bad. I just felt people thought they were bad. And to be fair, though, actually in 6th edition, I remember now because I did build a Hemlock in 6th edition. And I tried to run it, and I was like, "Oh, this doesn't work," because it would come in and it couldn't cast any of its psychic powers when it entered. Anyway, it was a whole thing. Anyway, yes. Long story short, I was doing flyers before they were cool, but then I was certainly cashed out all my chips on that year. But anyway, yeah. So no, I mean, Codex creep happens a lot, and there's a lot of mad stuff in the mix. I've played against most of the mad stuff that was doing the rounds at the different points. I think, but it was rare that you encountered like the really janky stuff. I remember the first time I came up against the 3rd edition or 4th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex meta madness, and I was like, "Wow, that's like." It was such a weird moment to me where I think that was when kind of competitive play became really interesting to me within 40k, because I was like, oh, there's levels, because I never saw that as an option until someone did it. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And it was You took a bunch of sorcerers, you paid to give them a bunch of lesser spells, you spanned it so as you got Siren, and Siren was you couldn't be targeted by your enemy because you appeared to be a friend, and then you basically get a jump pack sorcerer, give him the Siren, and then you'd run him up the board, and then turn 2, all these lesser demons would just deploy around them alongside obliterators. He would lash of submission you, which would basically deep strike you towards yourself, and then you just blow them away with plasma guns, and it was like, yay! And then just the lesser demons would just charge off everywhere, and it was like, yeah, games. It was so mad. Anyway,
I do actually remember coming up against a bloodletter spam, like the bloodletter bomb, real. And that was in a doubles tournament. So what could be considered a fun and friendly game. I think that was me and Richie, and I think we only lost, but we really won it, but then lost out on points due to reasons. I think it's because we only got to turn 2 or 3 because the people with the bloodletter bomb spent ages trying to work out where to deploy it. So we kind of.
You're saying they slow played you? Who are these people, Phil? We should name and shame them.
Name and shame them. Yes, yeah. I mean, it was a slow game.
Boo. Anyway. Last question. Come on now, Phil.
Last one from old Jew Bravo over on the Facebook page. He says, in the last edition, power creep was real and makes a lot of trouble. Actually, with older codexes like Guard or Elder, it's still a hard matchup against newer books. But I have to say the 9th edition books are well compared to each other, in my opinion. The Space Marines, who was stupid strong for a while now, has a nice codex with interesting options. Death Guard is also fine, and the new Drakari looks amazing. They managed to get nice, diverse, and not too insane strong army with the 9th edition codexes. So I think we will have a good time. So one point to make is everyone's sort of saying like 9th edition codexes are super strong. When it comes to Space Marines, they actually got toned down because the second version of the 8th edition codex was crazy strong.
Yeah, and again, I think, I was a strong, cheerleader or whatever for that sort of sentiment, that sort of statement when we read the Space Marine Codex way back when, and the Necrons. 9th edition books aren't broken like 8th edition books are. The 8th edition supplements and the 8th edition Space Marine Codex is really unnecessarily strong because of how all the different elements interact. Games Workshop have done a much better job this time around. The problem with Drakari book is mostly exemplified within... most of the problem with the Drakari book comes from the Book of Rust. As soon as you start adding that stuff in, that's where it starts to get really weird, because you add a bunch of really weird witch abilities that I don't feel like the guys who were writing the Drakari book had any kind of knowledge of, or I assume not, because it feels like there's a lot of weird synergies there. And I think that's where stuff starts to fall apart, is when you take stuff from outside of the book. Because I think the Drakari book, bar a few weird little things, is really good. And actually, within the confines of a 9th edition game played under normal circumstances, as I've kept saying, is a strong book. But I think that's the thing. Is I think 9th edition books against 9th edition books are pretty fun. But again, someone needs to establish a sensible play environment for that to be best expressed. There you go. I don't know. I've sort of said it many, many times, but I agree. I think the 9th edition books are really good, and I do think Games Workshop have done a very good job of removing the weird loopholes that plagued 8th edition.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I've got to say.
So you got...
well, yeah, I mean, we've said it before. 9th edition codexes with themselves, I think, will be fine. I think Drakari will be fine. I think they're just a bit of a meta shift swing in terms of the tournament results this week, and in a few weeks' time, it'll calm down a bit. They could end up being really good. There could be, as you say, discrepancies between Book of Rust swinging it in a favour which wasn't intended. It would be interesting to know, obviously, because of books being delayed, whether that was a bit like the Admech one, whether it was sort of potentially written before the new codex came out, or was it written with that in mind, or did it come out afterwards, or written at least afterwards, with the express intention of being more in line with the 9th edition Codex as opposed to tying it in with the 8th edition one.
Yeah. Yep.
And Book of Rust, Book 2, I'm sure that will be in the Warhammer Fest preview.
Oh, there you go. More predictions there, Phil.
More predictions.
Lovely times. Well, there we go. That concludes episode 83, I reckon, Phil. That was a good old chitter-chatter about things going on in 40k. Join us again next week where we're going to be talking about, I assume, Warhammer Fest. Right, Phil?
Yeah, and there's people want to hear about my really cool Damocles Command Rhino conversion. But no, it'll be Warhammer Fest. Of course it is.
Well, we'll maybe get some of that Damocles Rhino nonsense in there as well. Who knows, hey? It's anyone's guess. But thank you very much, guys. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.